Thank you for your gift. The Dark Overlord accepted the point of light from Laine's hands without any discernible change in expression. It appeared he hadn't grasped the underlying meaning behind Laine's words. He simply hesitated for a moment before taking the luminous fragment into his grasp. Unlike the myths that would form in later generations, in this era, no life could exist without the permission of the master of spirituality. Every soul required spirituality, but not all that possessed spirituality had a soul. Thus, the soul was merely a subset of spirituality. In the original course of events, even without the intervention of the Titan Iapetus, known as the divine child of the soul, natural spirits such as nymphs would have still come into existence. However, under Laine's dominion, only the gods remained exempt from this new order. After all, gods were different. Their very structure defied conventional understanding, existing in a peculiar, enigmatic state that even Laine had yet to fully comprehend. What about mine? A voice from the side interrupted his thoughts. Nyx, who had been silently observing, finally spoke. Laine blinked in mild surprise. He had always assumed that Nyx and Erebus shared a close and unified bond, their relationship devoid of the tragic conflicts that had befallen other divine unions, such as Gaia and Uranus. "Don't look at me like that," Nyx remarked, detecting his curiosity. Her tone held a faint trace of irritation. "He and I aren't truly husband and wife. The divine children you speak of are merely the offspring of our true forms. I thought the Foreseer knew everything." Now Laine was genuinely intrigued. In both the mythology of future generations and the history he had personally witnessed, Nyx had always remained a distant, elusive figure. Much of what he knew about her was based on inference rather than direct knowledge. It suddenly made sense why the twin gods of the Dark Night exhibited little care for their offspring. Unlike the progeny of other ancient deities, their children never received the status or treatment befitting the descendants of primordial gods. To Nyx and Erebus, these so-called offspring were nothing more than the natural manifestations of their true forms responding to the world's call. Having encountered the personifications of the primordial gods firsthand, Laine understood that for those ancient entities who had developed self-awareness, their true forms and their manifested personas were entirely separate existences. This was precisely why, despite frequently mentioning Ananke, he had never truly concerned himself with her. The three aspects of the origin and their personified embodiments could not be equated. Though Nyx could wield the power of destiny, she was not privy to the full scope of fate itself. "My apologies, that was an oversight on my part." Unfazed by Nyx's sarcasm, Laine extended his hand, using his authority over spirituality to condense thousands more soul embryos. They drifted toward Nyx like luminescent motes, and amidst them, a small glowing trinket gleamed. Behind her ever-shifting veil, Nyx's lips seemed to twitch in amusement. Despite herself, she reached out and accepted the offering. Always eager to take what belongs to chaos, she remarked dryly, her voice carrying a note of mockery. "You certainly know how to manage a household." "A necessity," Laine replied nonchalantly. If only the world recognized the sovereignty of gods over their own domains, such measures would be unnecessary. His goal was clear: to secure a portion of the origin of the stars before the collective god of stars could claim it. This particular star, however, was unique, and he hoped Nyx would be the one to place it in the sky. Mother Earth, the sea god, the impending god of the sun, even the godhood of the moon which I once wielded. I foresee them all being torn apart by the forces of the world in the future. The mere thought of escaping the world's grasp is already a struggle, Laine mused. Fortunately, I succeeded. The physical stars would continue to form, but their connection to the concept of stars would be severed. Instead, they would become luminous celestial bodies, aligning with Ceus, the lightless celestial god. For now, starlight and pure light were indistinguishable, but in the future, Laine intended to imbue them with unique attributes. "I could hang it later," Nyx remarked lazily. "As soon as the corresponding deity is born, your theft will no longer hold any power. If that is your wish, then do as you please." Laine shrugged, unaffected by her response. The uncertain fate of chaos already resided entirely within the spirit realm. Not to mention the fragments of destiny he had absorbed during its formation. The spirit realm itself, and even Laine, were anomalies never meant to exist within destiny's design. If Nyx intended to wait for the birth of a corresponding deity, she might very well wait until the world met its end. Humph. Nyx's displeasure was evident, and she made no effort to conceal it. Erebus, observing the exchange, let out a quiet chuckle before finally intervening. "All right, Nyx," he said smoothly. "Your presence here suggests your interests align with mine." His gaze turned to Laine, his voice measured. "Let's not waste time. Lord of the Spirit Realm, we wish to know, how did you steal source power from the world's grasp?" No god desired to be controlled. Until now, they had simply been unaware that such an option existed. But Laine's success had revealed a path, and that was why Nyx and Erebus had remained. They, too, sought liberation from the world's dominion. It's simple. Laine met the Dark Overlord's gaze, unhesitant. To possess a fragment of origin beyond the world's control, one must intertwine it with space-time and fate, cast oneself in as the primordial matter, and in doing so, forge the foundation upon which the world itself is built. The void that cradled creation, the matter that formed existence, spirituality, and fate, these were the four pillars of the world. A deity's body could, in some capacity, substitute for both spirituality and matter. It was upon this principle that the spirit realm had been constructed. And how, exactly, did you obtain an origin beyond the world's controls? Nyx pressed, unimpressed. Your explanation is meaningless without that answer. That, Laine said with a knowing smile, is innate. I was born before all of you, and you know it. Nyx fell silent. It was an answer she had not expected, but one that now seemed obvious. Erebus sighed. "It seems we leave empty-handed today." Still, before departing, he extended a final gesture of goodwill. "Prince Laine, allow me to offer you a gift as compensation for the trouble we have caused." With a flick of his hand, a swirl of darkness coalesced in his palm, a manifestation of raw, potent emotion. "This is my nephew's anguish. It shook the very fabric of the world, giving rise to many of my children. I had no use for it. Now it is yours." Laine accepted the churning darkness with a smile. "Thank you for the exchange," he said, securing the gift. "This has been a most productive meeting." Nyx merely scoffed, while Erebus smirked. And with that, the encounter came to an end. Half an hour later, within the spirit realm, after exchanging a few more words with the two ancient gods, Laine bid them farewell. If not for the birth of a divine child and the world's calling, these reclusive gods would have remained unseen for a millennium. They primarily existed in their original forms, seldom manifesting as personified entities. After parting, Laine stepped forward, passing through 7 layers of space-time barriers to return to the core of the spirit realm. As the Lord of the Spirit Realm, Laine had crafted this world in 7 days, dividing it into 7 layers from the deepest to the shallowest. Each layer housed a different aspect of the moon. The deeper layers could perceive the moons of the shallower ones, but the reverse was not possible. Standing at the core, Laine gazed upon the 7 spirit moons hanging in the sky, a testament to his divine craftsmanship. Initially, he had designed each moon to possess dual colors, silver-white alongside their unique hues. He planned to assign them individual symbols in the future. However, the nascent spirit realm had yet to develop this refinement, and for now, all 7 moons appeared in the same monochromatic hue. Looking around, Laine saw that the barriers between the 7 layers were transparent to him. The spirit realm was still largely uninhabited. Only the 2 outermost layers sustained life. The inner 5 remained empty due to his current limitations. He could only create life forms that adhered to structured order. The outermost layers maintained a stable chronology, while the inner layers grew progressively chaotic. This made it impossible for anything but the last created beings to exist there. Yet the central peak where Laine resided was an exception, anchored in absolute stability. Its foundation was Laine's own spine, piercing through all 7 layers across the temporal plane, marking the future site of his palace. After admiring his realm, Laine casually conjured a chair and seated himself. He then summoned the beings he had created. "Liana, I am here, Your Highness." A winged girl materialized at his call, bowing before him. She bore a humanoid form, but her silver-white wings distinguished her divine status. In the spirit realm, she and her sisters functioned akin to territorial deities, managing its affairs on Laine's behalf. Laine called them Christodes, transparent, deceit-free souls. Created on the 6th day, they numbered 18, with Liana as their leader. Though they shared the essence of true gods, they lacked godhoods, akin to divine beings, yet not reaching even the rank of weak divine power. Divine power level 0. That was their state. "I have a task for you." Laine's voice was gentle as he addressed the kneeling girl. Currently, the projection of the spirit realm manifests as the nether moon, its 7 crescent phases illuminating the underworld. The origin of chaos and the nether moon is gradually converging toward the spirit realm, but this process will take at least 2,000 years. I cannot afford to wait that long. I need someone to wield the authority of the nether moon to hasten this convergence. She will take over its godhood on my behalf. "To serve you is the purpose of my existence," Liana responded without hesitation. "Very good." Laine nodded and stretched out his hand. The condensed concepts of the nether moon surged toward him, forming a multifaceted crystal. With a simple motion, the crystal entered Liana's body. Instantly, a surge of divine power erupted from within her. "From this day forth, you are the goddess of the nether moon." At his decree, Liana's divine power surged to level 2. The nether moon godhood currently capped at level 5. But if Liana could fully assimilate the chaos-associated origin, she could ascend to intermediate divine power. When the time came, Laine would assist her further, elevating her to a top-tier deity of chaos. As he observed her transformation, Laine noted that his own assimilation of chaotic origins had accelerated. Bestowing godhood had paradoxically strengthened him rather than diminished his power. His gains in source power had been immense, so much so that even now the origins of the nether moon and stars continued to flow into the spirit realm. By his estimation, it would take millennia to fully integrate them. Yet with the goddess of the nether moon now in place, the process had accelerated tenfold. "Aster, I am here, Your Highness." A second divine being stepped forward. Laine wasted no words and directly summoned hundreds of orbs of light. The star representing indeterminable destiny had already been positioned by the Lady of the Night. It was now time for the other stars to take their place. These celestial bodies were, in truth, mere projections. Their true forms remained within the spirit realm. Just as the 7-phased spirit moons projected their light onto the underworld, these stars would channel their radiance onto chaos, linking their essence to the greater cosmos. Until the god of stars emerged, they would continue absorbing source power from the chaos-bound concept of stars, evolving in strength. If the star gods were late in arriving, these projections alone might surpass the physical stars in potency. With a simple gesture, another multifaceted crystal settled into Aster's being. "I decree that you shall scatter the stars across the night sky, illuminating the world with their light. From this moment forth, you are the weaver of stars, the goddess of starlight." Aster's divine power flared, though she barely reached weak divine power level 1. Compared to the nether moon, the authority over stars and starlight was still fledgling. But that hardly mattered. Laine could already sense the acceleration of his assimilation of the star's origin. One by one, he consecrated 12 star gods, each aligned with a month. He imbued them with the concepts of time, the passage of seasons, and the impact of celestial cycles on nature. As their divine essences solidified, Laine's own bond with time deepened. Satisfied, he dismissed the newly anointed deities. He had no intention of bestowing further godhoods at this time. More powerful domains, such as order, history, spiritual beings, and time, required vessels of greater essence than his current creations could bear. Perhaps in 1,000 years, Liana would be capable of holding higher godhoods. But for now, Laine had reached his limit. Turning his focus outward, Laine conjured a circular mirror from space and time, gazing upon the earth below. Though it felt like an eternity had passed, only a single day had elapsed in the mortal world since the spirit realm's formation. Below, the war between Uranus and the Titans raged on. Divine blood flooded the battlefield like rivers. The Heavenly Father's power had diminished to less than a third of its peak. Though he fought bravely, the tide of fate had already turned. An era's end, Laine murmured. He unfurled a scroll woven from moonlight and dipped his brush into the Divine King's spilled blood. As he painted, he whispered its title, Chaos's first masterpiece, The Death of the God King. Uranus would not perish, not truly, but as the first Divine King, his reign had reached its end.
Hey, welcome to Firescale Audiobooks. If you enjoy our audiobooks, please consider subscribing to the channel. Also, feel free to share your review in the comments section below.
Boom! Another punch, and Iapetus lay on the ground, utterly unable to move. Although the rising force from the earth shielded him from most of the impact, his divine power was still too weak. Relying solely on his godhood of speech, he couldn't even withstand a casual blow from Uranus. With a divine power level of 7, this was hardly befitting of an ancient Titan god. If not for the god's immortality, he would have been torn to shreds at the very start of the war. Help! Bang! Without looking, the god of speech knew that it was his equally weak sister, Mnemosyne, the deity of language and script. Language and speech were just as feeble. And script, the 3 lines of maxims on the Oracle Stone tablet, was the true origin of script. They were the only 2 beings on the battlefield with weak divine power, their sole value lying in using their undying divine bodies to take a few more punches for their brothers. As offspring nurtured by the Heavenly Father and Mother Earth, they were born with weak divine power, but due to their insignificant godhoods, both saw little change over thousands of years. At least Mnemosyne had a target for her hatred, having identified the culprit who stole her godhood of memory, the mysterious ancient god Laine. But Iapetus could only accept his weak status. At Rip! Struggling to rise, the god of speech watched as the leg of his former elder brother Oceanus was torn off, the 4th time he'd lost a limb. The master of the ocean's divine authority lay in ceaseless regeneration, and the power of the sky wasn't adept at preventing recovery, so every time a limb was torn off, the lord of the great ocean was able to heal quickly. But it was meaningless, only subjecting him to more pain. Other than Cronus, who had thrown the Heavenly Father's organ into the sea, Oceanus had drawn the most hatred. Even though his divine power was strong, he still couldn't withstand a single blow. Clearly, the ruler of the sky had shown him that some deities possess strong divine power because they barely qualify, while others achieve it only because that final step is just too difficult to surmount. The earth split open, and land at the edges crumbled into pieces, strewing across the sea, giving rise to islands. Celestial bodies fell, lightless ones crashing onto the earth, creating veins of or making valleys and hills. This great war had been ongoing for 7 days and nights, and except for the first day, when some luminous celestial bodies inexplicably appeared in the sky, the whole world had been in continuous destruction. But finally, during a certain collision, Oceanus was shocked to discover that although he was sent flying by the Heavenly Father, he seemed not to have sustained more serious damage. What? 2 cries of surprise rang out simultaneously. The master of the ocean was astounded at his own unharmed state, while Uranus was furious at the waning of his own power. On the side, Cronus, who had been constantly contending with the Heavenly Father by leveraging the power of space and time, finally revealed a smile. With most of his origins swallowed by the spirit realm, even borrowing power from the past with Rhea's help, he was barely able to hold on. The other Titans suffered only external injuries, but he was running out of his origin. Without claiming the title of Divine King, the remaining space-time source power wouldn't even allow him to maintain an intermediate divine power level. To prevent his brothers from harboring ill thoughts, he had even refrained from showing his weakness, detected only by his sister Rhea. But the two were always close among the Titans, so the goddess pretended ignorance. Fortunately, fate was still on his side, and Cronus had outlasted his father. He had persevered to this very last moment. "Ha! You can't hold on any longer, can you, my brutal father god?" Hidden behind time, Cronus's laughter spread across the land. He made no effort to conceal his joy, this being the only good news he had received in a while. "Is that so?" Uranus retorted with a cold laugh, silent. He looked at his once youngest child, now his eldest. He deeply regretted not realizing his ambitions earlier. Alas, it was too late. The power of a deity is eternal. Even 7 years would not exhaust me, let alone 7 days. Hearing this, the Titans couldn't help but feel anxious. They didn't question Uranus's words, for the power of deities was indeed eternal. Even though they were continually wounded, they could still fight for several months more. For the Sky Lord, whose divine power was far greater than theirs and who had always held an absolute advantage, 7 years were not an exaggerated claim. But could they hold on for 7 more years? At that moment, the majesty of the Heavenly Father seemed to regain the upper hand in their hearts. Yet the act of betrayal made them too fearful to beg for the Father's mercy. Given Uranus's character, the rebellious Titans would, under no circumstances, receive his forgiveness. But at this moment, Cronus spoke. His voice even carried a hint of amusement. "Under normal circumstances, indeed, as you have said, my father god," the corners of the god of time and space's mouth curled up in a mocking smile. 7 days had passed, and he had finally realized what that transformative force his father was contending against was. He couldn't help but thank fate once again. Deities are immortal, and he did not dare to cast his father, the symbol of the sky, into the abyss. But as long as this power of transformation existed, Uranus would soon fall into eternal slumber. Unless, in his arrogance, he was even willing to change his gender in order to cling to life. But that was impossible. Cronus was well aware that his own father would rather die than accept such humiliation. "You are the original father." Cronus's laugh grew even more unrestrained. "So you are different from the other gods. When the symbol of your masculinity disappears, you cannot use your divine power to recreate it. Because it is not only your organ, but it is also the embodiment of all your masculine energy. Without it, you will no longer have masculine energy within you. Is that right, my dear Father God? Or should I say, my dear Mother Goddess?" Ha ha ha. Amid his laughter, Uranus's face contorted in displeasure for the first time. The rest of the Titans also seemed to understand something and started to look at their father with strange glances. "Silence, you rebellious. You are the rebel." Cronus interrupted his father's reprimand with a cold laugh. He raised the sickle, eyeing his father. He had once been so powerful, but now he was reduced to nothing but verbal attacks. Cronus felt a tinge of emotion, but then feeling the emptiness within him, he hesitated no more. "You betrayed the Mother Goddess. You betrayed the will of chaos. Your tyranny deserves punishment long ago. I, Cronus, the king of time and space, in the name of the future divine king, decree that the god of the sky is guilty and shall suffer the punishment of eternal slumber. Sentence forever." The next moment, distance seemed non-existent before him. Though he was miles away from the Heavenly Father, his sickle pierced through the core of Uranus at that very moment. The Sky Lord tried to block it, but this time, his invincible divine power couldn't break through the slow of time. Right before the eyes of all gods, he was impaled by the sickle. His divine blood splattered across the earth. "I have won, Father," Cronus murmured, so only the two of them could hear. "You have one?" "Perhaps," said Uranus, sensing the increasingly turbulent transformation within him. Uranus knew, unless he was really willing to let the world twist his gender, his only option would be to resist the transformation by sleeping. But at the last moment, the proud monarch of the sky still did not bow his head. He looked at his child with cold eyes. His voice was also soft, yet every creature under the sky could hear it loud and clear. Cronus, my child, I hope you remember. You may win once, but you cannot keep winning forever. Everything that has a beginning has an end. Indeed, the prophecy said so. I was so, and you shall be so too. Watching Cronus's expression turn to one of shock and rage, the Heavenly Father laughed heartily for one last time. I curse you, he said. You will be overthrown by your own child, just like me. The pinnacle of the sky is my destiny, and Tartarus is your future. Cronus, I await you, my child. Clang! The sickle fell to the ground, but no one cared. Before them, the anthropomorphic form of Uranus disappeared. He turned into an intangible current of air, ascending along his own origin, all the way up, reaching an unfathomable height. The sky began to separate from the earth. The two that had once been close would never meet again. From then on, the distance between heaven and earth was immeasurable, and not even deities could fathom its heights. The reign of the Sky Lord, the first-generation god-king of chaos, ended that day. I shall become the new king, expressionless. Cronus picked up the dropped sickle and looked towards his brothers. Who was in favor? No one dared to look Cronus in the eye at that moment. Even Hyperion and Oceanus, who once had designs on the throne of the divine king, were now silent. The curse Uranus had uttered before leaving was heard clearly by all the gods. If it were any other curse, they might have ignored it, but this one was different. It was not only because of the identity of the cursor, but also because it reminded them of a warning given centuries ago in the underworld by a being once considered the god of prophecy. Rise by this means, fall by this means. Cronus had sought his father's position with schemes and force of arms. Did this also suggest that he would be betrayed by his own children and lose his reign of force? No one knew, but no one dared to guarantee that it wouldn't happen. One should know, the throne of the Heavenly Father had been bestowed by the world, so mere force could not replace him. But if Cronus became the divine king, this throne gained through strength no longer had the world's endorsement. However, time did not stop because of the god's silence. When no deity raised an objection to Cronus's claim to the throne, in the unseen, authority began to shift towards him. Since there was no world-recognized legitimate divine king, a leader acknowledged by the gods was passable. If within 500 years no one challenged Cronus, then he would become Chaos's second-generation divine king. In the meantime, although he could not fully enjoy the authority of a divine king, that great power was already starting to be transferred to him. Children, you have won. In the quiet, the scar-covered Mother Earth walked over from afar. In the previous battle, the injuries she had sustained were no less severe than those of her children. She had not appeared on the front lines, but instead had continuously mobilized the power of the earth to stop the descending sky. She had heard the curse too, but she acted as if she hadn't. At a moment like this, she didn't want to worry about a future that was unknown how far away. Hearing this, the gods all reacted. Their faces were no longer taut. They began to celebrate the victory and Cronus's ascension to the throne. Regardless of what they thought inside, faced with the strongest of the Titans who also held a high-grade artifact, Cronus, they all expressed agreement with his position as the divine king. You're right, Mother. We should hold a feast to celebrate today's victory. Listening to the gods' congratulations, Cronus forced a smile and said to the Titans, "But I think we should first deal with one matter, Cronus." Suddenly, Mnemosyne, who was beside them, spoke up. Her body was still covered in blood, and her wounds were slowly healing under the influence of divine power. She had hurried over from a distant hole in the ground, one that she had created herself. But at that moment, Mnemosyne seemed to have forgotten her pain as she looked angrily at her former brother, now elder. That god of prophecy, that thief, he stole my godhood of memory. You all felt it, didn't you? At the beginning of the battle, Chaos's consciousness exposed his deception. He is the god of spirit, and he has done something that angered the world. We should go and punish him, she declared. Right there in the underworld, the place where the world consciousness informed the gods. Indeed, before we celebrate our victory, We should go and discipline a sinner. Iapetus also added his support. He thought that everyone would think the same, given that it was Laine's prophecy that caused them all to suffer. But to his surprise, after he spoke, no one picked up after him, and the expressions on everyone's faces were somewhat awkward. Ahem, my brother, Hyperion said, the awareness of the world only appeared 7 days ago. Even if we punish him now, there's no reward to be given. Yes, the consciousness of chaos is always so inflexible. Once his offense against the world is done, the world's bounty on him is cancelled. Thesis also agreed. This elder sister among the Titans rarely spoke. But what about my godhood? Mnemosyne didn't quite understand. Was there a need for discussion about punishing a weak god of prophecy? Even without the world's reward, it would still be beneficial to assert the new divine court's authority by using him. I want him to become my sub-god. Although godhood cannot be transferred, there can be a long-term loan between a principal god and an inferior god. A twitch formed at the corner of Cronus's mouth. He had thought the same about the non-transferability of godhood back then. But he is not as simple as we thought, Mnemosyne. The Lord of the Ocean seemed unwilling to beat around the bush any longer. He addressed his sister directly. Just 7 days ago, while we were still in battle with the Father God, the twin gods of the Dark Night had already visited the Underworld. Your divine power is too weak, so you couldn't sense it. On the previous divine birthday, 2 ancient gods hastened the birth of new gods with their origin. It is evident that they have gone to trouble the god of spirituality. Upon hearing this, Iapetus fell silent. He understood his elder brother's point. If 2 primordial gods had taken action personally, then either Laine had already been cast into the abyss to receive the world will's punishment, and they wouldn't find him, or the opponent had used some method to make the twin gods of the Dark Night return empty-handed. In that case, they would be even less likely to find a solution, including Gaia. All the gods here combined were not enough for the Dark Overlord to handle with one hand. After all, the Dark Overlord's strength could contend with Uranus at his peak, whereas they previously faced only a heavenly father whose power had been greatly diminished, not even 1/3 to 1/5 of his full strength. Let's leave it at that, Cronus said, glancing at his sister who was still somewhat unwilling to let go. He didn't want to delay any longer. If possible, he wanted to take action against that one who had devoured his origin more than anyone else, but he had no choice but to give up now. Not to mention the opponent's consistently mysterious approach and the means that made the primordial gods yield. Just as prophecy alone was unsettling for him, he now understood his father. The Heavenly Father had, countless times, treated the Titans as playthings, yet he had never laid a hand on Laine. This was the deterrence brought about by the mystery of destiny. The other Titans might not care, as they never asked Laine for a prophecy, but Cronus was different. He was beginning to regret asking Laine about his own future. If he hadn't known, at least he wouldn't be in such a difficult position as he was now. Let's go. Back to Mount Otherworld. Mother's creations are ever so tempting. His mood darkened further. The future divine king, who should have been triumphant at this moment, forced himself to appear cheerful as he led the way towards Mount of the Gods. Let's go. We'll talk about the godhead later. Seeing her sister, Rhea, the only one who seemed to notice Cronus's state, also spoke out. Seeing that everyone said so, Mnemosyne could only suppress her reluctance and choose to fly with the Titans to the Mount of the Gods. She dared not act alone. Even Laine before, who was a level 9 god of chronology, was much more formidable than her, a level 8 god of script and language. The gods dispersed, and as the divine war ended, the earth too regained its calm. With the passage of time, it gradually recovered from the damage it had suffered. Half a day later, atop Mount Otherworld, the banquet celebrating the coronation of the new king began. Shush! In the spirit realm, Laine added the final stroke to his painting and looked at his work with satisfaction. The divine king was impaled through the chest, but his expression was not fierce. He spoke softly and gently, as if imparting wisdom to his own child. Opposite him, the time god holding the knife appeared shocked and furious, while the Titans' expressions varied. Below the scene, Laine thoughtfully added face-like cracks to the earth, representing Mother Earth, who was paying close attention. The next moment, although chaos was reluctant, the source power of artistry and painting still connected with the spirit realm. Unlike the stars that were tangible, Laine couldn't possibly devour all of chaos's star source power. But now, if no god symbolizing artistry appeared within the next 300 years, chaos would never birth such a god again. It can't be said that way. Perhaps there will be a god of painting born with superb technique, but utterly lacking in creativity. After sensing the situation of the origin absorption, Laine once again confirmed that he found it hard to absorb source power related to material things, which was determined by his original origin. Unless one day he could stand above the realm of great divine power and thoroughly comprehend the root of all things. Apart from artistry, there was also a surge of art and inspiration. The former was stronger and could last 1,000 years before being drained. The latter, pure inspiration, along with memory, was already within Laine's grasp. You are the world's first painting. The origin of artistry should favor you. You are the first piece of art in existence. Art regards you as its source. You record the end of an era. History should also include you, he said. Thus, the source power in the spirit realm began to converge on the scroll. Without a surprise, after 1,000 years, when the source power related to chaos was entirely consumed, a divine artifact would be born. With one step, Laine's figure vanished from the palace. The next moment, he appeared out of thin air inside an empty cavity in the mountain. There was nothing extra here, only a small pool in the center, with a fountain spewing a substance that seemed both illusory and real. Laine casually placed the death of the God King into the pool to nurture it on its own. The pool was an external manifestation of the origin of the spirit realm. Several other, yet-to-be-born divine artifacts were inside it. Laine looked toward the pool. Situated around the fountain were the 3 transformed oracle stone tablets. This is the Genesis artifact. In essence, it's a sacred artifact that is on par with great divine power. Even in the records of later generations, few such powerful creations exist in the chaos world. Feeling somewhat emotional, Laine knew that Gaia had never realized the true power of these 3 oracle stone tablets. Unlike other divine artifacts, the oracle stone tablets were rough drafts that only revealed their inherent power little by little as they were abused. In the original history, Themis used them to write the Codex. Hence she was respected by the gods, and the envious Heron never dared to offend her. The wise Métis used them to create hydrology. Hence her child was once destined to be the divine king. But now, they became possessions of the spirit realm. Even though the last stone tablet was not yet perfected, their power was still extraordinary. After looking at the slowly changing oracle stone tablets, Laine turned his gaze to their surroundings. 3 slightly inferior embryos were revolving around them, all divine artifacts spontaneously nurtured by the spirit realm. Time, space, and life. It's a pity the source power of space is still too little. After all, I didn't acquire the corresponding godhood before. Laine shook his head. Although the 3 formless embryos were all-powerful, the one for space was clearly not on par with the other 2, because the spatial origin in the spirit realm came solely from Cronus. Even so, once it was born, it would at least be a high-grade artifact, enough to drive any deity mad with desire. The other 2, the Part 4 time, had integrated the temporal origin and chronology of Cronus, along with symbols of the past, present, and future represented by history, calendars, and prophecy. It was very close to a Genesis artifact, but still lacking a bit. Laine estimated that after 1 or 2 more eras of temporal erosion, it could make up for its shortcomings. As for the embryo of life, it was nurtured by a great portion of the source power seized from the life vase. A complete life vase would grow stronger with the prosperity of chaos, and it was supposed to become a Genesis artifact symbolizing the beginning of all things. However, having lost most of its origin, it was destined, just like the one nurtured in the spirit realm, never to break through to the final step, unless in the future they could gain powers outside of the life domain. Aside from these, What remained in the pool were ordinary divine artifacts scattered around the edges, similar to the new scrolls that had been added. Some were conceived from the concept of moon, others were born from the source power of transformation. They were still formidable within their own domains, but in terms of power, they were far inferior to the previous ones. As for the even lower-grade sub-artifacts, those latter-day creations would not be found in the spirit realm at this time. Any true divine artifact contains the corresponding origin force. Even gods blessed with great divine power would not overlook their existence. If I hadn't created the spirit realm, I wouldn't have been able to obtain so many divine artifacts in one go. After all, only a world can directly nurture artifacts with origin force, Laine remarked. However, our new divine king would probably love to kill me. With a light chuckle, Laine glanced once more at the embryo nurtured by space-time source power, then returned directly to the palace he had been in before. The floating mirror of space-time in mid-air was now completely empty. In the span of that brief moment, Mother Earth and the Titans had returned to Mount Otherworld. Laine did not continue to pry into their actions. After all, the battle was over, and his level 11 divine power was not sufficient to make his spying undetectable. But without looking, he knew that the Titans were off to celebrate on Mount of the Gods, perhaps mixed with some distribution of power. Cronus, although the second-generation divine king, was also the one with the weakest divine authority. Unlike Zeus, he didn't have legions of offspring and lovers to solidify his divine court. Nor like Heavenly Father, did he have supreme divine power to suppress those who defied him. Adat novel benadat. Under his rule, chaos would fall into a feudal age lasting tens of thousands of years. The Titans would be unrivaled in their respective domains, and the third generation of deities would be born during this time. Now, because of Laine's intervention, Cronus, already deprived of his origin, was even less likely to do anything extra. Barring the unexpected, he would first content himself with being a King Zhou. It would be at least 1,000 years before he tried to do anything else. But he will send someone to find me. It's not just because of the two agreements, but also because he needs mortals to reinforce his kingship. If he cannot make the gods bow in worship, then making mortals, who resemble the gods, revere him as king is not a bad strategy. Besides, creation itself is an action favored by chaos. Laine silently chuckled. He was actually quite looking forward to creating life. The spirit realm is ultimately a world of spiritual life. Chaos is the ultimate destination for all creatures. The seed that endows creatures with souls. When that soul grows old and dies, all of it will return to the spirit realm. This is what Laine wanted, a way to continuously draw on the power of chaos. And then there is faith. Feeling the meager power coming from the lives in the spirit realm, Laine's expression was somewhat strange. First, he had chopped Cronus with a blow, and now Zeus was also suffering. For this unexpectedly good turn of events, Laine decisively expressed, the more the merrier. Atop Mount Otherworld, everything was as Laine had envisioned. The banquet at Mount of the Gods lasted 3 months. Even Mnemosyne had set aside the displeasure in her heart to enjoy the long-missed freedom apart from Cronus. They had cast everything to the back of their minds. This was the first time in their immortal lives that they were not subject to anyone's control. Regrettably, nectar did not yet exist in the world at that time, so the gods could not drink themselves into oblivion. After 3 months, the banquet was about to end. As early as the first month had passed, Mother Earth had withdrawn into the depths of the Mount of the Gods, resting her battered origin. So at this moment, only the Titan brothers were still feasting on the mountain. But as time went on, the atmosphere subtly shifted. It was undisputed that Cronus would become the divine king. But the former divine king treated the gods like servants, and this was something the gods could not accept. Just because Uranus could do it did not mean that Cronus could too. He did not possess the formidable power of the Heavenly Father, which led the Titans to entertain their own cautious thoughts. Especially Oceanus and Hyperion. One was the original eldest son, the other had command over the powerful godhood of Sun. Though they might not become divine king, They certainly wanted to be the kings within their own domains. And so, amidst the delicate atmosphere, Oceanus was the first to rise. He looked at his once younger brother, now his elder brother. Due to his sudden action, the Titans all cast their eyes toward him. Seeing this, Cronus's face remained expressionless, but his gloomy mood acquired a few more shades of panic. It was no longer the time of battle. The power Rhea had helped him borrow from the past was lost, and the power of the Divine King had just begun to gather. At this moment, his strength was at an all-time low. If he were to come to blows with anyone now, he would have no choice but to seek Rhea's help. But doing so would only further expose the issues he was grappling with. "My brother, do you have something to say to me? On such a day worthy of celebration, I shall give serious consideration to your requests." Cronus tried to appear as gentle and majestic as possible, even refraining from addressing his former elder brother as younger brother. "You worry too much, Cronus. I am not here to oppose you." The god of the ocean shook his head. He could sense that something was off with Cronus's emotions, but he did not think it was fear of himself. In his view, Cronus simply did not want to face open confrontation with him. After all, as the lord of the outer seas, the circumterrestrial river, even if Cronus were stronger than him, he would be helpless if he just hid in the ocean. However, he also had no intention of challenging Cronus's kingship. Even if the latter could do nothing against him, the other Titans would certainly not submit to him. In fact, apart from Rhea, who knew the inside story, the Titans had already recognized Cronus's power. But recognition aside, they were unwilling to kneel before the new Divine King as they did before the Heavenly Father. "You have proven your strength, Cronus, and I am no match for you," he said. "I merely want to bid you farewell, for afterwards I may seldom come here again. I must return to the ocean. That is the place where I belong." With that, Oceanus gestured to his sister. Theseus hesitated for a moment, but looking at her brother, she stepped forward alongside him. "I'll leave Mount Otherworld to you. I'm going to be neighbors with our uncle. I wish for your swift recovery, Mother Goddess, and for your kingship to be everlasting, Cronus." After bidding farewell, Oceanus did not wait for a response, but left Mount of the Gods, taking his sister with him. He was not afraid of Cronus turning ruthless. Without the power to face many, if Cronus dared to act against him, Oceanus believed his brothers would not stand idly by. Watching the god of the ocean and the original goddess of water leave, Cronus's expression stiffened briefly, but soon returned to normal. At least it was not the worst outcome. Even without the loss of his origin, he had never really expected his brothers to bow to him. Trying to calm his agitation, Cronus was about to say something to lighten the mood, but the rising figures of Themis and Hyperion made it even more difficult for him to maintain his composure. After the ocean deity sovereign had left, he realized that he could not make these brothers submit to him. So, he prepared to make concessions proactively, instead of being coerced by the collective will of the gods. But clearly, the god of sun was not going to give him that chance. "Ha! To my newly crowned sovereign, just like our eldest brother and sister, we are also preparing to leave," Hyperion declared. "The mountain of the gods is never as warm as the sun, so I still prefer it there a little bit more." Hyperion looked at his former brother, whose complexion seemed rather unsightly, feeling a bit of satisfaction in his heart. "You plotted and schemed, deceiving father from the very beginning. But what of it? Even if you've assumed the position of the Divine King, no one will truly submit to you. I suppose you wouldn't, like our father once did, forcibly keep us by your side, would you?" Hyperion said with a smile that seemed to carry genuine respect for the Divine King before him. "Such brutal acts are not befitting of a Divine King." "Of course you're right," Cronus said coldly. Among all the brothers, Hyperion had always been the one with the greatest ambition. Perhaps it was the influence of his godhood, but being the sun god, he naturally craved power. "Then go back to your son. Since you like it there so much, stay there for good. At it novel been at. He, of course, as the center of the starry sky, it is only right that I remain there." With a light chuckle, Hyperion didn't take the Divine King's words to heart. The earth belonged to the Mother Goddess and the mountain god, the great ocean to the two sea gods, and the starry sky was his domain. He was curious, what was left for Cronus, the divine king? Let's go, Thea. I wish for your swift recovery, mother. And to you, my dear brother, may your reign be eternal. The god of sun left with the god of eyesight, and Mount Otherworld suddenly felt much emptier. Seeing this, the remaining titans exchanged glances. Eventually, each of them stood up and bid their farewells to Cronus. Phoebe and Ceus went together to the heavens. As gods of celestial bodies and light, they would be neighbors to Hyperion. Themis did not explicitly say she was leaving, but she mentioned wanting to walk the earth since she'd been confined to the mountain of the gods for too long. Mnemosyne was still resentful towards Laine and wanted to try visiting the Lady of Night to find out what had become of Laine. She did not dare to go directly to the underworld to confirm it for herself, well aware of how weak her own power was. In the end, only Rhea, Crius, and Iapetus remained. Meteorology is fickle, so Crius stayed, using Mount Otherworld as his foothold. Influenced by authority, Rhea had always been close to Cronus, so she had no intention of leaving. As for Iapetus, he simply felt too weak and preferred to stay on the mountain of the gods. You're welcome to stay. I am not our father. Here you may do as you please, Cronus said. Forcing a smile, Cronus didn't care whether his dejection was noticed or not. Everything that had happened today had humiliated him, the new king, but he was powerless to change it. You just need time, Cronus, Rhea consoled her brother. When you have fully seized control of the divine king's throne, things will be different. I will be with you. Even if we can't compare to father and mother, you can gradually establish your own reign. Yes, you're right, Rhea. At least you have always been by my side. Feeling somewhat consoled, Cronus arranged accommodations for Crius and Iapetus. When he was alone, he stood atop Mount Otherworld, looking down upon the earth. Under the night sky, stars twinkled, and the vast earth lay silent. Regardless, the old era had passed, and a new era had arrived. At least, he was now the divine king. Since the divine king's succession, the exodus of the gods, 300 years have passed in the blink of an eye. During these 300 years, as if a shackle was unlocked, the phenomenon of the birth of deities flashed across the world more than once, and chaos's origin expanded accordingly. Upon the seas, after the Heavenly Father slumbered eternally at the supreme height, Mother Earth, along with her second son, the primordial sea god Pontus, conceived 5 offspring separately. They were the friendliness of the sea, Nereus, the marvel of the sea, Thaumas, the wrath of the sea, Phorcys, the danger of the sea, Keto, the power of the sea, Eurybia. After the birth of these 5 ocean deities, Pontus became much more active. He no longer lay alone at the bottom of the sea, but often roamed the coastal waters and occasionally set foot on land to meet with Mother Earth. In terms of power, the birth of his offspring caused a fraction of Pontus's godhood to split. However, as these deities were born, the concept of the sea further expanded. Between the increase and decrease, the primordial sea god remained a strong divine power, level 17. Similarly, upon the seas, the ocean deity, sovereign Oceanus, and the primeval water goddess Thetis also conceived a host of children. They currently number over 100, with most of the divine children being river gods collectively known as Potamoi. The goddesses represent certain streams, rivers, ponds, lakes, or even the ocean and subterranean water bodies. The vast majority of them are not true deities but territorial gods like the Christodes created by Laine at divine power level 0. Though immortal like deities, their strength is far less than that of true gods. Of course, among the Oceanides known as Oceanids, there do exist true gods. Currently, the most well-known are the eldest Oceanid, the goddess of oaths, Styx of the Styx River, and her sister, the goddess of renowned climbing. From then on, the godhood of oaths was bestowed upon the world, and chaos no longer responded to the oaths of the gods. However, correspondingly, the cost of swearing an oath to the river Styx became much less than it originally was. Different from the hustle and bustle of the seas, on land and in the sky, besides the mountain god Uriah, who alone engendered some unnamed mountain gods. Only the eldest daughter of Ceus and Phoebe was born. Her name was Leto, the goddess of nurturing and nursing. Laine paid certain attention to her, for her future offspring would be renowned in later ages. But all these matters were unrelated to the Lord of the spirit realm. In the past 300 years, Laine had been ceaselessly drawing and assimilating the origin power. The spirit realm's expanse had already covered the entire underworld, and it even began to spread to the surface. He had thought that such monotonous days would continue for hundreds of years more, but on this day, an unexpected visitor made Laine halt his actions. Through the projection of the spirit realm onto the material realm, the nether moon, Laine clearly saw the Titan deity, the goddess of justice and law Themis, standing there. He gently stroked his palm in front of him, and space and time fluctuated. Under Laine's power, the past and the ever-changing future continuously flickered before his eyes. It didn't take long for him to know the purpose of Themis's visit. "Liana, go bring her to see me," Laine said softly. "Adet novel ben adet. As you command, your highness." Since leaving Mount Otherworld, Themis had roamed the earth for 300 years. This world's chaos was very similar to that in mythology, but there were also many differences. Not to mention the oceans. The surface area of the land alone was hundreds of times larger than Earth's region around the Mediterranean Sea, although most places appeared wild and perilous. Moreover, as the origin of the world rose, the expanse of chaos continued to grow. By the time of Zeus, no one knew just how vast the earth would become. However, although the world became bigger, many problems followed. In the process of Themis measuring the land with her legs, she discovered various places of disordered laws more than once. The world was supposed to be orderly, but in those peculiar places, the rules of everything turned upside down. Water flowed from low to high, spaces where one would endlessly loop upon entering, flames that induced coldness. As the goddess of justice and law, Themis found it difficult to tolerate their existence. She tried to correct them with the authority of the law, and the result was delightful, as she indeed managed to restore the disordered rules back to normal. But as time passed, the goddess realized she was engaging in a futile effort. These phenomena represented the inherent chaos of the world's rules, loopholes left behind from the creation of the world, and they were being born and extinguished at every moment. No matter how many she eliminated, there would always be another one waiting for her. As long as chaotic source force remained within the current laws, this situation was unstoppable. I need to create a codex. I want to write the correct order on it, so the world can see what I mean, and then the laws of the current world will solve these problems themselves. After being inspired by her godhood, Themis went to visit Mother Earth. She had heard that Gaia possessed 3 magical stone tablets that had existed since the creation of chaos. But unfortunately, Mother Earth told her that thousands of years ago, the Oracle Stone tablets had been staked in a wager and transferred to the current god of spirituality. Therefore, to fulfill her idea, Themis went to the underworld, where Laine last appeared in the present world. However, after half a year of searching throughout the underworld, Themis still found no trace of Laine. Only the nether moon in the sky seemed to be a creation transformed from his works. In the end, she came before the nether moon, hoping its master would hear her plea. "Prince Laine, I have come to visit you and hope that you will meet with me," Themis said, somewhat helplessly standing before the nether moon. But the next moment, Themis instantly stepped back, watching the space ahead of her warily. A ripple of space passed, and the aura of spirituality seeped out. A black-robed girl with wings suddenly appeared before Themis, who had not sensed her presence at all beforehand. She had never seen her before, but without a doubt, this unknown presence emitted the aura of the nether moon. And most crucially, in Themis's perception, the figure was clearly a true god, but she had never felt the fluctuations from the birth of her divinity. Lady Themis, the unknown deity, spoke. Although the goddess of justice didn't recognize the figure, it was evident that she was quite familiar with Themis. I have come in response to your request to meet. Lady, my master sends for you. Master? Themis was somewhat surprised in her heart. She had come to visit the god of spirit, yet this goddess before her was calling Laine her master? Even the former heavenly father, though he enslaved the gods in substance, never had them refer to themselves as slaves. Because, as acknowledged deities of heaven and earth, embodiments of the laws of chaos, to demean another was to demean oneself. Please follow me. Without resolving the goddess of justice's confusion, Liana turned around, and a transparent portal appeared before the two of them. Furrowing her brow, but not stepping back, Themis, as an immortal deity, knew that only Tartarus could contain them in the current chaos. Clearly, she did not think that this unfamiliar space before her possessed might comparable to the abyss. And although not entirely sure, Themis guessed that this unknown space, as well as the goddess who claimed to be a servant, might very well be the aftermath of that day 300 years ago, a subsequent event of the world's furious upheaval. Perhaps she would soon know all the reasons. How should I address you, goddess who oversees the nether moons? As she followed the black-robed girl through the portal, Themis did not rush to look around, but rather inquired about the name of the unfamiliar deity. In the current narrow, divine circle of chaos, the sudden appearance of an unseen god inevitably aroused her curiosity. My lord has named me Liana. The girl's voice was very soft, but when it entered her ears, it imparted a sense of full authority. Themis knew that this was the influence of the nether moon godhood. In today's underworld, aside from the recently emerged goddess of oaths, Styx, there were only the occasional descendants of the twin gods of the dark night. But Styx had just been born, and the six offspring of the dark overlord who wielded doom, destruction, decay, sorrow, deceit, and lust were not very powerful. The nether moon was subtly the ruler of the underworld. Even in later generations, the original nether moon and the goddess of crossroads became viceroys of the underworld, possessing authority second only to Hades. From this, it can be seen that the nether moon held an extraordinary position in the underworld. Therefore, under the influence of the godhood, Liana's voice naturally carried a hint of royal bearing, much like the ocean deity sovereign who now presides over the sea. Upon hearing this, Themis nodded, but had taken only a few steps when she suddenly stopped. Hearing the silence behind her, Liana in front turned around, her gaze inquiring why the goddess of justice had halted. I am terribly sorry, but may I ask what this is, Princess Liana? Adet novel ben Adat. She had been preoccupied with asking for Liana's name, but as Themis observed her surroundings, she was surprised to find herself in a special place. Everything around her seemed not much different from the external underworld, and if not for the sudden change to a world of black and white, Themis wouldn't think she had moved at all. Looking around, she saw transparent creatures resembling umbrellas floating in midair. Floating about, many tentacles hung down from beneath the umbrellas, seemingly extracting something from their surroundings. Themis could sense that this might be the power known as spirituality. Although she had never seen them before, the goddess was certain that these strangely shaped things were indeed a form of life, different from the gods. They had no divinity. The mere passage of time could leave marks on them or even erase their existence. But undoubtedly, these peculiar life forms she was seeing for the first time also possessed thought, though still very rudimentary. This was what she found most incomprehensible. In the current chaos, no non-divine intelligent life existed, even in its most primitive form. This is a type of ghost jellyfish, the weakest of the wandering jellyfish, Liana explained gently. In the first layer of the spirit realm, the illusory spirit realm, they're the lowest level of the food chain, yet reproduce quite easily. Look! Following the direction of Liana's finger, Themis noticed a larger, transparent creature nearby that was splitting in the middle. The splitting process was slow, lasting about 15 minutes. When the last bit of attachment broke apart, the transparent creature completely divided into two. Immediately after, countless transparent filaments emerged from the split sides of each half, reconstructing the missing halves of their bodies. Both halves reduced in size, But as time passed, they each regenerated the missing parts, becoming two smaller complete beings. "The Lord says this is mitosis," Liana introduced earnestly. "It is a primitive yet efficient form of reproduction. If the concentration of spirituality is high enough, they can double in half a day's time." Mitosis? This brand new term challenged Themis's worldview. As the master of law and justice, she was usually reticent and maintained a strict demeanor, unaffected by external things. But today, she was genuinely surprised by what she had learned. "Yes, mitosis," Liana corrected. "Didn't you see the spirituality filaments that came out when they were regenerating their bodies?" The goddess of justice remained silent, seemingly uncertain about what to say. "Let's go." Seeing that Themis had no more questions, Liana gestured, and another gate of light emerged before them. Themis could distinctly feel that the force referred to as spirituality was incredibly dense beyond the gate of light, more than 10 times denser than where they currently were in the first layer of the spirit realm. This is the gateway to the second layer of the spirit realm, the communicative spirit realm, also known as the true spirit realm. Normally, only a few places in each layer of the spirit realm are interconnected, but the barriers between the first 3 layers are intentionally set weaker, making them easier to breach. Plus, since you are an invited guest, we'll just take the express route. Following Liana through the gate of light once more, Themis was just about to acknowledge her understanding when she was once again stunned by the scene before her. In the first layer of the spirit realm, despite everything being black and white, and her initial startling encounter with the peculiar ghost jellyfish and mitosis, it was still within Themis's comprehension. They were nothing but special creations. Hearing that the god of spirit had borrowed the life vase from Mother Earth, and that the birth of new life forms other than plants was not too strange. But now, what appeared before Themis was a scene she had never before seen. 2 silver crescent moons hung in the sky, where many winged creatures chased each other in flight. The ground was covered with a variety of strange plants, exuding an air of spirituality, and there were at least more than 10 types of new creatures with fur or phosphorescent shells walking on the land. Not far away, around a kilometer off, there stood a small lake. Many scaled beings swam within it, and at the bottom, there was an odd creature that kept opening and closing, with a bright pearl forming inside. "Are these all creations of Prince Laine?" Witnessing everything before her, the goddess of justice asked incredulously. She had already thought it a monumental feat when Mother Earth created plants, but only today, seeing these special creatures, did she suddenly realize the desolation on the chaos terrain. Yes, the sovereign used 7 days to create the world. These are the creatures of the spirit realm that the sovereign created on the 5th and 6th days. Pleased with the foreign god's astonishment at the creator's mighty power, Liana explained with a smile. After a moment of silence, Themis promptly spoke. "May I approach and take a closer look at them?" "Of course, but—" With a slight wave of her right hand, Liana summoned a 3rd gate of light. This time, Themis couldn't feel any presence from behind the gate. "It seems you plan to stay here a bit longer, so we can't go up layer by layer. I'll wait here for you, and later, we'll go directly to the 7th layer of the spirit realm, to the sovereign's palace. Then, you'll be able to present your reason for coming here to the sovereign." Only then did she remember that she had actually come to borrow the oracle stone tablet, but after hesitating for a moment, Themis still headed towards the multitude of spirit realm creatures. Such unique Half a day later, though still feeling somewhat unsatisfied, Themis returned to where Liana was. She had kept her host waiting for too long. Although strictly speaking, the current chaos didn't yet have a well-defined etiquette, she still felt it wasn't right to do so. "How was your harvest?" Liana asked with a smile. It was an eye-opener. In the half-day, Themis had traversed thousands of miles around her, seeing over 1,000 types of bizarre spirit realm beings. Some of them fed on plants, some on other lives, and some on certain concepts, all of which the goddess had never seen before. Compared to her oddly shaped brothers, they didn't seem so strange after all. During her observations, Themis had tried to stop the confrontations between different beings, but later she came to understand. Mortals and gods are different. Food is a pleasure for the gods, but a necessity for them. The goddess had witnessed the spirit realm beings fight each other for food more than once, and as a result, she was exposed to their unique battle methods. Their power was weak, but their fighting techniques were primitive and fierce. Unlike the gods, who merely wield divine authority and divine power, the spirit realm beings also knew how to probe, trap, and disguise. When I return, I must discuss this with Cronus. The Mother Goddess's agreement with Lord Laine still has 700 years to go. Once the life vase returns to the Mother Goddess's hands as agreed, we should also borrow this divine artifact to create life on Earth. As she followed Liana through the light gate, Themis silently made up her mind. In comparison to the current desolate chaos world, the spirit realm felt much more vibrant to her. Passing through the illusory portal, the next moment, the breath of source power that hit her face brought Themis's thoughts to an abrupt stop. Looking around, the goddess found herself on a peak so high that its bottom was nowhere to be seen. 7 crescent moons hung in the sky, and the mountain pierced through 6 layers of semi-solid interfaces. Standing on the mountain, although she couldn't make out the details of those interfaces, Themis still felt like she had the world at her feet. Mount Sinai, also known as Nairath, was the name of Mount of the Gods, which translates to the beginning of the moon, the source of spirituality. When she reached this place, the goddess understood this information instantly. Moreover, she felt a power within the mountain, very similar to her own origin of godhood, breathing, flowing, and slowly changing its nature. If this was all opened by Lord Laine, it truly is a magnificent feat, the goddess of justice said sincerely. Creating interfaces and giving rise to living beings was something Themis, with her divine authority, didn't know how to achieve. It is indeed a magnificent feat, Liana said matter-of-factly. The world has not yet spread the name of the Lord, but one day they will know the supreme power of the Lord. With a polite smile, and although struck by the scene before her, Themis still felt it was due to a particularity of authority. The gods had absolute power in their respective domains, much like how a future goddess of agriculture could prevent everything from sprouting. But without the corresponding authority, even a being like Uranus couldn't change this outcome with sheer power alone. At novel Benedet, Themis didn't know what spirituality as a godhood meant, but she guessed that everything before her was probably a demonstration of the absolute nature of this particular godhood. Continuing forward with Liana, the steps under their feet were made of unknown materials, and the various man-made objects along the way kept the goddess's gaze busy. The place opposite the light gate was not the summit, but a bit lower down. After all, although capable, Liana would not directly open a portal to Lord Laine's palace. However, Themis didn't feel slighted. On the contrary, she was quite interested in observing the surrounding landscape. Everything before her eyes was a novel scene she had never encountered before, and such more civilized creations naturally resonated with the higher positions of the law and order godhoods. Themis had made her decision. She too wanted to set her sights on building something on Mount Otherworld. As time slowly passed, although Mount Sinai was a no-fly zone, the two were already not far from the summit. So soon, Themis arrived at the palace gates, led by Liana. Themis's eyes brightened once again at the sight of the magnificent man-made structure she had never seen before. Compared to the sprawling and rudimentary abodes of the chaotic gods, this orderly and civilized creation undoubtedly won the goddess's favor. The buildings were not clustered together, each boasting its own style and beauty. Although Themis could only see a few nearby, she still took note of their styles one by one. This is the place where God should dwell, the goddess thought to herself. Here we are, the Temple of Lops, where the master welcomes guests. Liana pointed to the splendid great hall in front of them, smiled faintly, and then bid farewell. I have completed my task as a guide, and now it's time for your meeting with the master. Themis had just wanted to ask Liana to stay, but the black-robed goddess gave her a smile and then took a step back. With that step, just as when she first appeared, she vanished without a trace in an instant. But this time, Themis noticed something. The other's movement seemed to leverage the space-time power of the spirit realm, allowing her to shift to a different plane of the spirit realm in the blink of an eye. Even without moving, when separated by a layer of the world, she naturally could not sense the other's presence. Seeing this, Themis thought of the first layer of the spirit realm, the illusory spirit realm, identical to the underworld. Perhaps Liana had always been standing by her side, standing in the nether moon, only invisible due to Themis's inability to penetrate the barrier between reality and the first layer of the spirit realm. Could Cronus achieve this level of space-time power? After a brief contemplation, Themis shook her head. Rather than dwelling on it, she stepped toward the great hall before her. Having arrived at the doorstep, it would not be proper to keep the host waiting any longer, especially since she, too, was keen on building her own palace and interested in learning from the palace's interior designs. Stepping over the threshold, her vision was suddenly brightened. The palace interior was somewhat brighter than the light of the crescent moon. Looking around, she saw tables, lamps, vessels, decorations, and a black-clothed deity rising from the main seat. Though Themis did not know what civilization meant, she felt that everything she saw was more to her liking than anything she had experienced in the past. "Welcome, my lady." Raising a goblet, Laine said with a smile to the approaching goddess of justice. "Before we discuss serious matters, please enjoy the dinner I have prepared for you." "Thank you for your hospitality, Prince Laine." With a subtle lift of her eyebrows, Themis accepted the floating goblet and drank the red liquid in one gulp. "This is nectar." The liquid seemed to contain memories, as Themis knew its name upon tasting it. For her, it was merely a rather pleasant drink, but the goddess believed her brothers would absolutely adore such a creation. Setting down the goblet, Themis moved forward to take her seat. She looked forward to the forthcoming banquet with added anticipation. What an unforgettable experience! Within the Temple of Lops, Themis drank her last sip of nectar. Her originally pale cheeks also flushed slightly. Ordinary beverages were not enough to affect a deity, but clearly, those crafted by Laine with the authority of the wine were not among them. "If you're interested in it, you can take some back with you." Setting down the crystal-clear wine glass, Laine gestured, and dozens of barrels of brewed wine appeared. "Since our last parting, it's been a while since I last saw Cronus. Consider these drinks as my belated congratulatory gifts for his ascension to Divine King. I suppose he will like them. Then I will accept them on behalf of Cronus." Apologetically smiling, Themis was unaware of the grudge between Laine and Cronus concerning the origin of space and time. She thought Laine intended to remind Cronus not to forget their two previous agreements. Indeed, the goddess of justice was somewhat dissatisfied with her brother's prolonged failure to fulfill the agreements. In the past 300 years, she visited Mount Otherworld several times, paying her respects to Mother Earth, who had regained some vitality. Themis heard from the Mother Goddess that Cronus had used the excuse of not having full control over the divine authority to refuse going to the abyss to release his 6 strangely-looking brothers. Mother Earth was quite angry about this, but she was not the Divine King after all, so she did not know whether Cronus was just making excuses or if his powers were indeed far lesser than those Uranus once wielded. Because of this, Mother Earth left Mount Otherworld, residing permanently near the ocean in the eastern region, staying with her second son. The 5 marine deities born one after another came into being during this period. "Your Highness Laine, I thank you once again for your dinner, but I have come here to seek a favor." Adjusting her demeanor, the goddess of justice, who had removed her blindfold 300 years ago, looked straight at Laine and got straight to the point. With a faint smile, though he had already made plans, Laine still feigned ignorance. "Please speak, my lady. I am quite curious as to what has compelled you to seek my doorstep after 300 years of wandering." Hearing this, something stirred in Themis. Although she did not conceal her tracks, it was apparent that Laine possessed unknown means to observe the earth. However, the goddess of justice paid no attention to these details, as she directly stated her purpose. "In these 300 years, I have traveled many places. In the mortal realm of chaos, I found that the disorder and madness left over from the dawn of creation had not all flowed into Tartarus, but still existed within the laws. I sought a solution, and eventually the priesthood of law gave me an answer. I need to create laws for the realms of existence, which would allow the laws themselves to expel the disorder and madness. But what does this have to do with me? Laine asked, still smiling. Because I also need a creation capable of carrying these laws, through which I can communicate with the world, etching my laws into the roots of existence. Themis's expression was solemn. She could feel that the elevation of her godhood was tied to this task. If she could perfect the current world, the godhood of law would rise, supporting her to become a powerful deity of divine power, level 18 and above. I visited the Mother Goddess, seeking the Oracle Stone Tablet, this enigmatic artifact born at the beginning of creation. But she told me that thousands of years ago, it had come into your possession as part of a wager. Adet novel bin Adat. So I've come to boldly ask if I may borrow this divine artifact from you. Saying this, Themis looked towards Laine. Yes, meeting the gaze of the goddess. Laine nodded. It's indeed in my hands. But now, it is no longer the oracle. With a slight lift of his hand, the next moment, accompanied by a ripple of space, without any attempt to hide, the powerful presence of the Codex of Creation was immediately perceived by Themis. Without a doubt, this was a frightening high-grade divine artifact, and it even gave her a sense of something even higher. Different from what Mother Earth knows, Lady Themis, Laine said calmly as his right hand brushed over the spine of the brass book. The essence of the Oracle Stone Tablet is beyond her imagination, and the order it contains is even close to a great part of the chaos of Tartarus. I have crafted 3 divine artifacts using 3 stone tablets, and what you see here is the second one. Furrowing her brow, Themis knew that she might have to return empty-handed. The aura of the divine artifact before her was comparable to the life vase, and nobody would easily lend out such an artifact. But driven by the desire to perfect her godhood, she still spoke up. If you are willing, she said, I don't know what I would have to give to borrow this divine artifact from you. She had already prepared to make an oath, ready to serve Laine in the future. In truth, she had nothing else to offer. However, to her surprise, she received an unexpected answer from Laine. Nothing is needed, he said. As long as you swear to the spirit realm and acknowledge my indisputable sovereignty over the Codex of Creation. Then, for the next 1,000 years, it is yours. Looking at the astonishment on the goddess's face, Laine did not explain, but simply handed over the book that seemed forged from brass. He believed that she would not refuse. A bit astounded, but just as Laine thought, Themis hesitated for a moment when offered the divine artifact and still reached out to take it. The deity and godhood mutually influence each other. Facing the temptation of an elevated priesthood, Themis could not refuse. After chatting for a while longer, soon, with the borrowed divine artifact, the goddess of justice left the Mount of the Gods. After sending Themis away from the spirit realm, Laine too retreated to a palace behind Mount Sinai. That was his sleeping chamber, the Temple of Alas. Sitting on a soft couch, Laine watched through the time-space mirror as Themis, with her doubts and confusion, made her way down toward Earth. He knew that she was seeking a divine decree from the Divine King to enact laws in the mortal world. The Divine King's nod was also an indispensable part. After the laws are established, this divine artifact will be considered initially perfected. Looking at the stone book in the goddess's hands through the mirror, Laine whispered to himself. In his original plans, the Codex of Creation ought to be the recorder, perfecter, and innovator of all the world's rules and laws. And indeed, it's feasible for laws to be linked with spirituality. But the problem was that, long before Laine had established the spirit realm, the goddess of law had already been born. Laine could absorb the origin of the stars of the world, and he had almost taken in all of it. But that was because the true god of stars had not yet come into being, and Ceus was merely the god of lightless celestial bodies. But the law was different. The earlier Codex of Creation was powerful solely because it depended on the origin inherent in the Oracle Stone Tablet. The part of it that belonged to law was only a minute amount from chronology. However, as Themis establishes laws for the mortal world, a significant portion of the origin of law of chaos will rise, half of which will go to the codex of creation that bears it, while Themis will only obtain the other half. After this, the powerful creation, which could be considered near a Genesis artifact on its own, would be fully matured. And then there is the chaos and madness that are expelled after the establishment of the codices. Power does not differentiate between good and bad. What matters is that it's used in the right place. Gazing at Themis, who had reached the surface and was heading toward Mount Otherworld, Laine dispersed the time-space mirror. He could silently observe Themis, the deity with a divine power level of 13. But that did not mean he could watch the divine king, who was gradually securing his position. The following matters no longer needed his concern. The goddess of justice, for her own ascension, would invest all her efforts into completing everything related to legislation. His mind sinking into the root of the spirit realm, Laine continued to digest different origins. For a considerable time in the future, this would be his primary task. Atop Mount Otherworld, having obtained the Codex of Creation from Laine, Themis didn't stop for a moment and hurried to the Mount of the Gods. Legislating for the world wasn't something that could be done casually. A fitting godhood, a sufficiently powerful vessel, the interim world steward, and the divine king's authorization, each of these was indispensable. However, Themis didn't worry that her younger brother would refuse her request. After all, the position of the divine king was not immutable. As for Cronus, not to mention the 500-year limit had not yet been reached. Even if it had, his divine authority could definitely not compare with that of his father. Despite Uranus's retrograde and contrary actions, his deed of birthing life through union was in itself the greatest achievement of the divine king. Moreover, Cronus was a usurper, and the divine power he obtained was bound to be even lower. To be able to accomplish legislation during his own reign, this new divine king would undoubtedly be desperate for it. 3 days later, Themis finally returned to the Mount of the Gods and immediately sought out her younger brother, explaining her ideas to him in detail. However, contrary to what the goddess of justice had anticipated, although Cronus was very supportive of her legislation, he seemed to be more interested in the god of spirit. So, you're saying he not only made no demands on you, but also promised to deal with the chaos and madness expelled from the laws on your behalf? Yes, I thought they would gather on the land, creating many perilous dead zones, since I can't deal with them. But since Prince Laine is interested in them, I agreed to hand them over to him. A bit puzzled by the focus of Cronus's concern, Themis still answered. She guessed that Laine must have had some intent, but she didn't care. Those things were useless to her. Keeping them would only cause her trouble. Although Themis took it lightly, Cronus did not see it the same way. He had harbored resentment towards Laine for more than just a day or two. It's not that simple. There must be something you don't know. Laine will definitely gain something in the process. He is not the kind of person to act out of the goodness of his heart. With a cold snort, Cronus's expression turned somewhat unsightly. Had it novel been at 300 years had passed, and although the power brought by his own godhood was insignificant, the greater part of the divine authority he had consolidated still granted him the formidable power of divine power, level 17. But even so, whenever he thought of the origin power he had lost, Cronus deeply regretted the decisions he had made in the past. Divine power level is one thing, actual combat power is another. With the loss of most of his time-space godhood, even if the divine power level was the same, Cronus's strength was greatly reduced compared to before. What's more, if his time-space godhood had remained intact, his current divine power would have been one level higher. In the realm of powerful divine forces, the gap between levels is not something that those below intermediate divine power can compare to. Meanwhile, observing Cronus's expression, Themis was obviously misunderstanding. She thought he was angry about Laine's past prophecy, but as the goddess of justice, she wouldn't act on misplaced anger, so she spoke up to remind him. I know, Cronus, because of Prince Laine's prophecy, you and our brothers all harbored discontent towards him. But you should remember, at least for you, You not only proactively sought the prophecy from him, but you also owe him 2 favors. You once swore to the world to fulfill them. After 200 years, once you fully inherit the position of the Divine King, you cannot delay any longer. Cronus was somewhat at a loss for words. He cursed Chaos's rigid instincts in his heart once again. Even though that god of spirit had done something to displease the world, and even though he had encroached on his own origin to the world, it was always about the deed, not the person. Even its instinctive disgust for Laine, who stole source power, would not prevent it from honoring Cronus's promise. I will, but there are still 200 years, are there not? In the end, Cronus still accepted the fact that he had to work for Laine and turned to ask another question. You said he has opened up a domain called the Spirit Realm, which contains many special beings? Yes, Themis nodded. I plan to visit the Mother Goddess after he returns the life vase and create some new life on the earth as well. New life. Now that you mention it, I have seen some. Cronus furrowed his brows slightly, recalling. About 100 years ago, the god of destruction, Kur, representing the 8 gods residing in the underworld, came to Mount of the Gods to see me. At that time, some beings called nymphs of eternal night were following him. They were not deities, nor did they possess divine authority as quasi-gods. According to him, they were servants bestowed by Mother Night, the ancient god Nyx. In fact, Cronus had beautified the process. Kur didn't come to represent the 8 gods to pay homage to the Divine King. He came purely to show off in front of the new Divine King. Indeed, the deities of chaos were mostly very emotional. The Divine King was still alone, but Kur had attendants with him, which satisfied Kur's vanity to a great extent and secretly angered Cronus. But there was nothing he could do, for according to Kur's statement, he had a close relationship with his mother goddess, and the new Divine King did not dare to provoke a primordial god at this time. Of course, what Cronus did not know was that the god of destruction had also beautified his own process of obtaining the nymphs of eternal night. In his account, the 2 ancient primordial gods were very concerned about their divine children, but in reality, the twin gods of the dark night had hardly ever met with them. Erebus completely ignored his own offsprings of bodily evolution, and Lady Night, only out of nominal consideration, had given a few of the nymphs she created with spiritual embryos to them. None of them were endowed with divinity and transformed into demigods by Lady Night, not at all like the evidence of closeness between mother and child, as Kur had claimed. Hadn't Mother Night sought out Prince Laine before? Themis speculated. It might have been at that time that he and Princess Nyx created new life together. Perhaps, Cronus replied. But since Princess Nyx has accepted the existence of a new life, there should be no problems with them. When the time comes, I'll go with you to see the Mother Goddess. The Chaos terrain should also have some life that knows to revere the Divine King. Frowning slightly, Themis felt some dissatisfaction. Laine had created life in his own realm, and Cronus's first reaction was actually there might be problems? At least in her memory, Laine did not seem to have actively done anything to the Titans. You don't understand. Cronus shook his head and glanced at the face of the goddess of justice. But in the end, he said no more. He certainly didn't wish to broadcast his flawed thinking all over the world. If possible, he would rather nobody knew about the deficit in the origin of his godhood. Let's leave it at that for now, Themis. By the time you've completed the draft of the Codex, I'll probably have already taken control of the throne of the Divine King. Then, I will support your actions in the name of the Divine King. That would be for the best. Nodding, the goddess of justice still didn't discuss Laine with Cronus in depth. To her, legislating was the most important matter at hand. The past 300 years were far from enough for her to understand all the loopholes in the current worldly laws. Now, with the help of the Codex of Creation, she could delve deeper into the rules of the world. Since Themis left the Mount of the Gods in the blink of an eye, another 500 years had passed. In the Chaos world, time was so valueless that this remained the case even after the appearance of the first generation of humans. It was not until the era of bronze humanity that the gods grew accustomed to counting time in years rather than centuries. 300 years ago, on Mount Otherworld, Cronus truly became the Divine King. Driven by his oath, he declared the new rules of the sun and the moon in the name of the divine king, and the few remaining concepts associated with the moon completely flowed into the spirit realm. As expected, the future goddess of the moon, aside from having a glowing celestial body of her own, wouldn't be able to control anything else. Even the light emitted by the moon, apart from being called moonlight, had no mystical significance whatsoever. In regard to the second oath, Cronus also announced Laine's sovereignty over the elements and the qualification to weave the net to control them. The power of the elements thus flowed towards the spirit realm, but aside from the fire element, the influence of the other elements was mostly superficial. At novel Benedet, although there were no wind gods yet, wind was subordinate to meteorology. Water, earth, light, and darkness all had their respective deities. Only fire had not yet found one. Therefore, it was not surprising that there would be a future fire god who could not control the fire element. Moreover, as Laine fully embraced the source power of the fire element, he could further touch the true fire, bringing this unclaimed natural godhood into his control. In the future, even if a fire god was born in chaos, she would merely be a deity presiding over the burning of physical matter. Henceforth, the fire of the spirit could harm the material, but the material fire could not touch the spirit. In the realm of spirituality, Laine defined fire as the primal one. Beyond that, during these 500 years, chaos witnessed many divine births and celestial events. The most widely known among them was the birth of the original god of sun, Helios, the eldest son of Hyperion. On the day this new god was born, the entire world saw the great sun shine 1,000 times brighter. The original sun godhood split in two, with the larger part reverting to the Titan ancient god and the lesser portion to his child. Hyperion still represented the sun, but his eldest son represented the trajectory of the sun. There was no sunrise or sunset in the original chaos world, but now there were evening and dawn. And with the division of godhood, Hyperion, who was already approaching divine power level 18, suffered a great loss of vital essence, barely maintaining his strong divine power. Divine power could be sustained, godhood could be split, but the sun could not be duplicated. Thus, Helios, barely born, became a sun god without a Sunday. Since he lacked a celestial body corresponding to his godhood, Helios, though nearly a century old, still maintained the appearance of a child. Possessing a sun godhood of level 15, he was like the early Laine, merely a true god with feeble divine power. This Titan family drama certainly provided much amusement for the divinities of chaos. Apart from that, the second daughter of Ceus and Phoebe, the goddess of meteor Asteria, was born. Chaos's sky now had an erratic celestial body. But to Ceus' surprise, his daughter only represented the celestial body itself. The light she emitted didn't even contain a trace of energy, even though she was also a type of star. Aside from these minor events in the sky, the ocean saw the birth of numerous deities. Oceanus, in particular, had a keen interest in procreating offspring. With the birth of hundreds of divine children, numerous rivers, lakes, and fountains sprung up on the earth, and the sovereign authority of the god of the ocean began to expand. Although, as the circumterrestrial river, Oceanus technically presided over distant seas and ocean currents, friction began to arise between him and the ancient sea gods as his offspring proliferated. Their godhood couldn't be stripped away, but that didn't mean those with similar domains wouldn't fight. Just as the land was ever expanding, the ocean was actually growing as well. The newly grown ocean didn't have innate ownership, and though it had been divided between the two sea gods, that didn't mean it would always continue this way. The two sea sovereigns didn't clash directly, but conflicts among their children were not uncommon. Nonetheless, Oceanus, while prolific, was discontented. He had only two true god-children, and Styx resided in the underworld, scarcely heeding the commands of her own father. There was little he could do about this, but to continue procreating with the original sea goddess, Thetis. In such an environment, Métis, later renowned in mythology as the goddess of wisdom and strategy, now the goddess of hydrology, was born. Congratulations, my brother, another true god has emerged, and your divine lineage grows ever stronger. The god of meteorology said to his long-unseen elder brother within a palace far out at sea. Ever since Themis had built her temple on Mount Otherworld, soon after, big and small palaces began to proliferate throughout chaos. At least in the matter of indulgence, the chaotic gods learned quite quickly. And you will be soon too, won't you, Crius? I hear that you and Eurybia have come together, he said. Judging by the days, your first child should also be born soon, he added. With a lukewarm smile, Oceanus seemed not too enthusiastic. Beside him, Crius looked somewhat embarrassed. He was well aware that Oceanus was expressing his dissatisfaction. After all, it was common knowledge now that the ocean deity sovereign had a falling out with his uncle. Even though neither had come to blows, the two had ceased all communication for centuries. At such a time, Crius's choice of the ancient sea god's youngest daughter naturally upset him greatly. I know that you've had a conflict with Pontus, Crius said with a hint of helplessness, but there's absolutely no need for hostilities. So, on which side do you stand? Disregarding the pleasantries of the god of meteorology, Oceanus asked bluntly. I will stay on Mount Otherworld. I have no desire to come to blows with Eurybia's kin, but neither will I against you, Crius replied. Though he said this, Crius was acutely aware that for him, who had not yet become a god of great divine power, taking sides was not a good thing. It's better that way, my brother, Oceanus said, casting a warning glance at Crius, then turned around and loudly announced to the gods who came to the celebration. To celebrate the birth of my daughter, the goddess of hydrology, Métis, let us begin the festivities. Everyone present here is a friend of the ocean divine lineage. At these words, the tense atmosphere due to the two titans finally eased, and the gathering of gods began to enjoy the festivities, blessing the newborn as they indulged in the nectar of the banquet. This beverage, originating from the Mount of the Gods, became the favorite of all deities the moment it appeared, and no feast was complete without it. Rumor had it that it actually came from a deity in the underworld, but no one cared about its provenance. The gods only cared about one thing, that the nectar was pleasurable, and that was enough for them. Before the palace, while the deities celebrated, in a place unseen by them, in the spirit realm, a figure arrived silently behind the ocean temple. When the spirit realm began spreading across the earth, Laine did not first choose the continents, but opted instead for the more remote ocean. Now, he stood in the first layer of the spirit realm, looking at the small infant on the outer bed, his expression hesitant. She was Métis, who originally presided over strategy, wisdom, thought, and hydrology, the first wife of the third-generation divine King Zeus, and the mother of the goddess Athena. But now, she was just a weak infant with control. Unlike the offspring of the primordial gods, the progeny of the second generation of divine beings needed to develop. They no longer matured in a mere half-day after birth, like their parents did. Some took months, others an indefinite period. Their growth rates varied. At the same time, the new gods did not possess innate, powerful divine powers. Even the ancient titans had at least weak divine power at birth, but these new gods, except for very few, mostly started from divine power level 1 and slowly grew from there. Now, Métis before Laine's eyes was just like that. Her newborn skin was as smooth as milk, and her pair of black, lustrous eyes didn't resemble those of a newborn at all. But without a doubt, it would take decades for her to become an adult deity. This was not only because this was how it should be for the third generation of gods, but also because her origin was not strong. When she was born, wisdom, thought, and strategy automatically scattered throughout the heavens and the earth, much like memory once had, leaving her with only hydrology. Unlike Mnemosyne, however, the third-generation gods were not born with knowledge, so she would not realize that she was meant to have these powers. Métis, Athena, perhaps I should take her away. Muttering softly, Laine was not worried about being discovered. Oceanus and Theseus were indeed strong, but as long as he didn't show himself near them, it was hard for them to detect him. This was the absolute nature of divine authority. When Laine hid within history, and with the spirit realm as cover, even if there was only a room apart, no one could sense his presence. Never mind, although destiny has been altered, I still hope the world remains familiar until Zeus ascends the throne. Moreover, in the original trajectory, the goddess of wisdom didn't seem all that clever. Shaking his head, Laine eventually gave up on his plan. With Métis's potential, if he took her back to the spirit realm and nurtured her carefully, she would be capable of holding some powerful godhoods. For instance, Script, its origin flowed towards the spirit realm every moment. Normally, the presence of the god of Script would to some extent block Laine's absorption of Script, but unfortunately, the Oracle Stone Tablet possessed an even more orthodox source power of Script. Under these circumstances, having another person in charge of a godhood would not only accelerate the spirit realm's absorption rate, but would also bring Laine a powerful subordinate in the future. But in the end, he abandoned this idea. A goddess of wisdom who couldn't even discern her own safety. How was such wisdom any different from Prometheus's forethought? In comparison, perhaps her daughter would be a more fitting spokesperson for wisdom. Having made his decision, Laine stretched out his hand, and 3 multifaceted crystals silently appeared before him. The spirit realm's absorption of the 3 great godhood origins had just begun, but that did not prevent Laine from solidifying the corresponding godhoods. Even though they were weak now, as the spirit realm absorbed all the scattered origins, they too would return to their rightful heights. With a gesture, the 3 crystals fell into the body of the infant girl before him. Simultaneously, Laine's figure vanished in an instant. The next moment, the ocean deity sovereign appeared directly beside the bed. He looked around, but found nothing. The instant Laine conferred the godhoods, he returned from history to the present. Oceanus immediately sensed something amiss, but was incapable of tracking Laine's presence. "What is it?" Soon after, Thesis also appeared here. The goddess wasn't previously in the temple, but sensing her husband's sudden burst of divine power, she quickly rushed back. "It's nothing, might have been my illusion." Shaking his head, Oceanus prepared to return. But as his gaze swept over his daughter, his expression suddenly froze. "Adet novel ben adet. Is this the aura of the godhood of wisdom?" A bit uncertain, Oceanus picked up his daughter, carefully sensing the aura within her. Soon, he not only confirmed his previous sensing, but also discovered additional auras of strategy and thought. Was Métis gifted with other godhoods by the world? Did you sense the presence of chaos just now? Thesis also noticed the anomaly in her daughter. But since chaos had never shown the phenomenon of transferring godhood outside of the sub-gods, she instinctively thought it to be a gift from the world. Perhaps, but that's not important anymore. The ocean deity sovereign was not entirely sure, but he was indeed very surprised. Unlike Pontus's selective breeding strategy, he was synonymous with casting a wide net. Among his many children, only Styx had a godhood that allowed her to reach intermediate divine power level, while the rest, like Clymene and Métis, with fame and hydrology, found even achieving weak divine power level a challenge. But now, with wisdom, strategy, and thought, Métis was destined to become a powerful being like her eldest sister. At least intermediate divine power level, and in the distant future, possibly even a mighty divine power level, that would be much stronger than many of the ancient Titan gods. My brother Iapetus once sought a wife from me, and though he made no demand, my daughters who are less than true gods do not match his status. I was initially inclined to choose between Clymene and Métis, but it seems now that I don't need to choose. Oceanus was very pleased, and Thesis nodded in agreement. Bearing many children and spreading the influence of the ocean god's lineage across the world, forging alliances with deities through marriage. This was their plan from the beginning. The mythology of later generations also proved his success. Unlike his other brothers, besides Rhea and Themis, the ocean deity Sovereign was the only ancient Titan god who still retained some influence in the era of Zeus. I will discuss this matter with Clymene. As the goddess of renown, Marrying a noble titan also suits her godhood well. She will be satisfied with this. As Oceanus's wise and supportive wife, Theseus voluntarily took on this task. Good. I hope she can bear my brother a powerful deity. In this way, when we face my uncle in the future, we will have one more ally. Nodding to his wife, Oceanus got up and headed to the front hall. His abrupt departure had surely sparked much speculation among the guests, but now he could cheerfully share the good news with them. From this day forth, the name Métis the Wise would resound throughout the sea, and no one could criticize him anymore with only quantity, with Styx being just an exception. Behind him, Theseus took another look at her daughter, and then she too left the grand hall. She had been previously monitoring the currents, preparing to extract the essence from her husband's domain to combine with her godhood, nurturing a divine artifact. This primitive method of artifact creation was quite ordinary, not as powerful as those made by the Cyclops who had special talents in smithing, but it was still sufficient to serve as a symbol for the ocean deity sovereign. Theseus was going to continue preparing for this. As for her daughter Métis, gods are immortal. In the ocean temple, Laine bestowed godhood, and in the next moment he utilized the properties of the spirit realm to leave his original location. Beyond Mount Sinai, the space-time of the spirit realm became increasingly chaotic the deeper one ventured. Beyond the third layer, one entered the deep layers of the spirit realm, where a single step forward could mean traveling 1,000 miles in the real world. Although currently only the first 2 layers of the spirit realm had been completely structured, this did not prevent Laine from leveraging the characteristics of other dimensions. Had it novel been at. Thus, in an instant, he arrived at the sea's surface thousands of miles away. This was still due to the spirit realm's coverage being too small in the present world. Otherwise, with the movement method Laine called Spiritual Realm Shuttle, he could travel between the 2 sides of the earth in a matter of minutes. When living beings are born on the earth, and my divine power accumulates to level 16 or above, I can weaken the barrier between the surface of the spirit realm and the real world. By then, life forms with innate intuition could directly see into the first layer of the spirit realm, and spirits that are deeply resolute or honored with rituals can stay in the shallow spirit realm, continuing to exist in another form. Contemplating in his heart, Laine looked back in the direction of the ocean palace. Later generations would say that much of Zeus's wisdom came from Métis, yet now the godhood of Métis had been conferred by Laine. But it's hard to say. Rather than attributing Zeus's wisdom to Métis, I'm more inclined to believe he just borrowed her name, swallowing a deity to use her divine authority, as if it were that easy. Besides, if Zeus managed to deceive the goddess of wisdom, his sweet talk is probably not inferior to Métis's wisdom. Shaking his head, Laine continued on his way to a location near the coast, following the direction in his memory. Having diligently absorbed origin for 800 years in the spirit realm, Laine had no intention of immediately going back upon finally emerging. At the very least, he intended to retrieve something from that place. We've arrived. 7 days later, after crossing the vast sea, Laine reached a peculiar sea surface. There were no waves here. The surface of the sea was as still as death. Yet, when the sunlight shone upon it, it possessed a divine beauty. Not far away, a layer of blood foam, emitting desire and hatred, floated in place. This was the source of all anomalies in this sea area, and even Pontus himself was reluctant to come near. This was where the organs of Uranus had fallen, imbued with his hatred for the Titans and Pontus. In the future, the Erinyes and Aphrodite would be born here, as the birthplace of 4 deities. Once the blood of the divine king dissipated, this place too would become a sacred sea area. Who are you? This is the domain of the nearby sea lord. Strange deity, state your name. Suddenly, along with a somewhat strange tone, a half-snake, half-fish creature emerged. She eyed Laine not far away with caution, but did not act rashly, as the aura of divine power on him informed her that this was at least a deity with intermediate divine power. As one of Pontus's 5 offspring, she, like her brother and husband Phorcys, was a life form that was half demigod and half monster. Together, they had sired many sea monsters, the most famous being the Grey sisters. They appeared as old women, but shared one eye and one tooth among the three. They each ruled over venom, brutality, and terror, but they were not true gods. They were quasi-gods who held powers and possessed immortality, akin to the Oceanides without godhood. Keto, danger of the sea, I know of you. Laine didn't look at her, nor did he answer her question. Compared to Eurybia, the power of the sea, and Nereus, the friendly sea deity, Keto and her brother were more like Cyclops, disliked by all deities of chaos. There was no helping it. The gods of chaos have always been superficial. But I do not know you, strange deity. This is a forbidden sea area transformed by the Father God, a fact known to all deities. Keto's expression grew increasingly unfriendly, particularly affected by her instincts compared to regular deities. That's not important, Laine said, an interesting thought suddenly emerging in his heart. What's important is, do you want to change your appearance? To get rid of your current form? Or at least, to have another form that can be recognized by the gods? Keto's increasingly ferocious face stiffened. Laine's persistent irrelevance was somewhat infuriating to Keto, who, being somewhat controlled by her beastly nature, had intended to follow her instincts and attack Laine. But his subsequent words immediately brought her back to her senses. She had claimed more than once that she didn't care about her appearance, but only she knew her thoughts when the gods' banquet turned her away at the door. What should I do? Her voice suddenly softened, though Laine could tell that this softness was still harsh to the ears. Without playing coy, Laine pointed towards the foam of blood in front of him. Drink it, of course, only a small part of it. If you dare swallow it all, you'll only serve as a vessel, birthing 4 new deities. But if you take just a few sips, maybe you'll gain more than you expect. Keto hesitated. Known as the peril of the sea, she was very aware that this place was the most dangerous part of these waters, and the source of the danger was this blood. She didn't know whether she should believe this stranger deity's words, but she was too desperate for change. To drink or not is up to you, but this might be your only chance. Extending his hand, Laine scooped a spoonful from the blood before him, then with a flicker, vanished silently from the surface of the sea. In coming here, he had done so for this particular reason. Encountering Keto was an unexpected bonus. Wait! Hurriedly speaking out, Keto wanted Laine to elaborate. But Laine clearly had no time for her. His casual reminder was merely for his own amusement, like watching a spectacle for fun. Damn it! With a roar, but driven by a deep-seated longing, Keto still turned her gaze to the blood foam. After a long while, her ferocious face showed a struggle. But in the end, Keto's desire for beauty overpowered her instincts. She no longer cared about the danger of the blood before her, and gulped it down. As the blood entered her stomach, her appearance indeed began to change. At a certain moment, she stopped drinking and looked at her reflection on the sea's surface. A beautiful goddess with black hair appeared there, the wildness in her eyes adding a touch of allure. Yet at that moment, Keto felt no joy. Instead, she felt envy towards those who were truly beautiful. She knew she had now become a goddess of beauty, but it was a dressed-up beauty, a false disguise of loveliness. Simultaneously, she understood under the influence of godhood that the true deity symbolizing love and beauty would be born from these blood foams in the future, and her disguise would be meaningless in front of them, serving only as a backdrop for the flowers. Nothing is everlasting without change. One day, I will become true beauty. If not, then let them all die. As long as there is no one more beautiful than me, then I will still be the epitome of beauty. Her voice was no longer raspy, but the pleasant tone spoke cruel words. Keto looked at the blood foam on the sea and silently swore an oath in her heart. The future goddess of love and beauty was destined to be her enemy. After a long stare, when the sun set, Keto still left that place. Following her memory, she headed towards the palace of a deity, where a gathering seemed to be taking place. The future was still distant, but now She wanted to experience what it was like for the other deities to enjoy a banquet. This time, she wouldn't be rejected. Laine casually created a different kind of goddess of beauty and didn't take it to heart. In later generations, Keto actually didn't have much presence. Only her monstrous offspring appeared in the epics of humans to highlight the great achievements of the demigod heroes. As a monster herself, compared to the king of all monsters, Typhon, she wasn't even a match for one of Typhon's many children. However, now, as the goddess Keto, perhaps she may leave some new traces in the history of chaos. 700 years had passed since the birth of Métis and the rebirth of Keto. The world doesn't revolve around one person. Despite Laine living a secluded life for 700 years, it didn't affect the increasing prosperity of the world of chaos at all. 100 years after returning to the spirit realm, a bright moon once again hung in the sky of chaos, which had been dim for 900 years. That was Selene, the daughter of Hyperion and Thea, the moon goddess. This powerful goddess, which should have been in her original trajectory, seemed particularly weak since she had lost all concepts related to the moon. Her limit was the realm of weak divine power, and she could be thankful that the moon was the largest luminary in the night sky. This matter greatly annoyed Hyperion. He had suppressed his own son because the sun could not be divided, but his daughter Selene should have been his best assistant in ruling the stars. Instead, she turned out to be a great disappointment. Because of this, Hyperion hesitated for a long time, but he ultimately went to the underworld. After all, in his view, as long as he did not seek a prophecy from Laine and let himself be caught in the web of fate, the so-called god of spirit was nothing to fear. The twin gods of the dark night, who had once retreated, were probably entangled by the same mistake of the two generations of divine kings, because they were restrained by prophecy. Therefore, Hyperion searched throughout the underworld. He tried to find Laine to have him return the concept of the moon. The god of the sun was unwilling to trouble himself for a sister he was not close to, but it was different for a daughter who held the promise of becoming a powerful deity. However, facing Hyperion's actions, Laine simply couldn't be bothered, and so after several years of searching, the god of sun could only release his power and frustration around the nether moon, unable to touch the light body that seemed so close at hand. Having returned without success, Hyperion then approached Cronus. He assumed that it was only because of the Divine King's edict that Laine was able to take away Selene's power, and that if Cronus revoked that order, the concept of the moon would return to its rightful owner. But Cronus decisively refused. Not to mention that the previous matter regarding the moon was a vow he had made about the world. Even if it was not, he would not show a friendly face to this brother who had always been unpleasant. Moreover, Cronus knew very clearly what others did not. Referring to his own origin of time and space, he knew that the concept of the moon, before it came together, might indeed have been under Laine's control due to the authority of the Divine King. But afterwards, it was likely a one-way journey. So, to cover up the true nature of his own origins deficit, Cronus was even less likely to agree to such an impudent request. Repeatedly rejected, Hyperion flew into a rage, but sensing the Divine King's increasingly powerful aura, he felt somewhat helpless. In the end, he had no choice but to return to the sky, venting his anger on those around him. During that period, the sun in the sky capriciously released its power, causing the temperature of the entire world to rise. Fortunately, at that time, the earth was mostly inhabited by deities, so it didn't cause any disaster. However, because of this incident, the third generation of deities in chaos also came to realize that in the underworld, there was an ancient god who controlled the nether moon and spirit who rarely ventured out. After a few more years, Astrius and Eos were born successively. The former was the child of the god of meteorology and the powerful sea god Eurybia, the god of the stars. The latter was Hyperion's second daughter, the goddess of dawn. Unlike the records in mythology, there was no violent drama this time. Or rather, Laine never really believed that part of the mythology had much authenticity. Rumor said that Eos, cursed by the goddess of love and beauty, could only fall in love with mortals, but given her later behavior, she didn't seem like any kind of prudish goddess. So, just over 100 years later, these two new gods came together spontaneously. They gave birth to the four wind gods as well as numerous star gods, most of whom were quasi-gods without godhood. Among the star gods, there was only one exception. She was Astrea, the star of justice, the goddess of purity. Although not very powerful, as a bona fide true god, she was seen as a leader by all the star gods. The wind gods, the Anemoi, were much more powerful. They tore off parts of godhood from their own grandfather, the god of meteorology, representing the winds of the four directions. They were Boreas, the god of the north wind, Notus, the god of the south wind, Eurus, the god of the east wind, and Zephyrus, the god of the west wind. With their birth, the air currents of chaos became more variable. At the same time, on the earth and in the ocean, the Melii, three birch tree goddesses, and the three Furies, the goddesses of vengeance, were successively born. They were the transformation of the divine blood left by Uranus, the former called the Melii, and the latter called the Uranes. Perhaps because the dangerous Keto of the sea had drunk the divine blood before the Furies were born, they regarded Keto as their eldest sister and stayed in the ocean with her. At Novelben the three birch tree goddesses came to Mount Otherworld to meet the divine king and were taken under the wing of Rhea, who had become the queen of gods. Elsewhere, on the Mount of the Gods, Iapetus also had his own divine child. With the daughter of the ocean deity sovereign, his own niece Clymene, he successively fathered three deities, all of whom were well known in later generations. The first god of strength, later the bearer of the heavens, Atlas. The creator of bronze humanity, the forethought fire thief Prometheus, and the afterthought simpleton Epimetheus. Unlike his weaker brethren, from the day of his birth, Atlas showed extraordinary divine power and possessed the potential to become a great force. For this, the ocean deity sovereign personally congratulated his nephew/grandson's birth and blessed him to never be invaded by the ocean. Of course, while his own brothers were striving hard, the prolific Oceanus was also busy. Over 700 years, thousands of children were born into the chaos world, and rivers and lakes started to spread across the earth. Most were territorial gods, but there were still several true gods among them. They were Eurynome, the water meadow deity, Perse, the boiling water goddess, Pronoia, the goddess of foresight, Doris, the gentle goddess, and Philyra, the healing goddess. As the number of children increased, the tension between Pontus and Oceanus intensified. Their offspring had fought a few battles at sea, but with no significant outcomes. But anyone with clear sight could see that if not for concern over the divine king on Mount Otherworld, perhaps these two sea gods would have long since gone to war. Besides, during the birth of the many deities, something happened that puzzled the gods. It was roughly 1,000 years after Cronus took the throne, when many mountain gods and river gods noticed a verdant light flying out from underground, heading towards the abode of Mother Earth beside the East Sea. After that, the ground of chaos terrain inexplicably trembled for 3 years. It was Mother Earth's anger, but there were no further developments. Later, divine King Cronus came to visit Mother Earth to borrow the life vase, but returned empty-handed. It was not until the goddess of justice, the queen of gods Rhea, accompanied him that they obtained what they sought. However, to the disappointment of the three Titan deities, as the origin of life of chaos, the life vase indeed could create living beings, but none of them possessed consciousness. With no other choice, Themis had to give up the idea of creating life for the time being and continue with her preparations. So, hundreds of years passed by, and after 1,500 years of preparation, the preparations came to an end. It was on this day that the goddess of justice and law finally stood atop Mount Otherworld, beginning to enact laws for the present world. Are you ready? At the summit of Mount of the Gods, in front of a complex of palaces, Cronus asked. Although he wasn't leading the legislation, as the divine king, he would also have a share of the world's rewards. Of course, where is your decree? 1,200 years had not left a mark on Themis. Instead, Years of toil had made her gaze even more steady and sharp. She looked at Cronus, demanding the last necessary item for the legislation. Use this, the scepter of divine authority. Adet novel benedet. My brother, who dominates the outer seas, is enormously powerful, with progeny more numerous than all the deities of Chaos World, aside from Aria's mountain gods and the celestial lineage of star gods. Cronus spoke in an even tone, showing no particular emotion when talking about Oceanus. His former elder brother had fused the essence of the sea with the origin of godhood to smith the scepter of the Sea King for himself, thus commanding the great oceans. Cronus, following suit, forged a scepter of divine authority for himself. Yet, once the scepter of the Sea King appeared, thousands of sea deities followed its command. But Cronus's divine decrees have been largely ignored to this date. His authority does not extend beyond Mount of the Gods, such as the current state of Cronus. Even the earth has long been occupied by a host of river gods, lake gods, and mountain gods. In their eyes, the rank of the divine king is a fact that hardly needs stating. Following behind others is not something to be proud of. Cronus. The gods will remember the first, but few know of the second. Themis, taking the scepter inlaid with 3 colored gems, reminded her brother. This was a sentence she had heard from Liana, and the goddess of justice found it quite sensible. For over 1,000 years, she had been visiting the spirit realm and then duplicating what she had learned on Mount Othries. She did this not out of stealth, for Laine had been happy with her actions. Themis's conduct not only did no harm to his interests, but actually accelerated his absorption of the related chaotic source force from Chaos World. Perhaps, but the strongest one is also the first, isn't it? The voice of Cronus had grown more confident than it had been hundreds of years earlier. Or perhaps, the increasingly significant divine authority had given him that confidence, and he was beginning to plan to act. The divine king had set 3 jewels in the scepter, hoping that one day he could command the sky, the earth, and the seas with it. Perhaps then, he might have the confidence to confront the curse left by the Heavenly Father, or even the unspeakable fate. However, unlike Cronus, Themis, in response to the divine king, nodded but inwardly was not optimistic about her brother's prospects. Unless he possessed a power comparable to that of the primordial gods, becoming the true king of all gods, the strongest one would remain no more than an empty boast. And just relying on godhood, Cronus was completely unable to achieve this. The sky had the potential for great divine power, as the Heavenly Father was the embodiment of the sky. But even Cronus, though Themis did not know of his origin's deficiency, originally only embodied slightly more than 30% of the current world's space-time origin. To become a true divine king, one must possess great power. But to obtain great power, Cronus could only rely on his position as divine king, which was essentially a vicious circle. In later generations, Zeus would break this cycle with faith, but the second-generation divine king had not that option at the time. "I am about to begin," Themis softly announced, no longer delaying. Everything was in readiness, and she was somewhat eager to start. Upon hearing this, Cronus quickly stepped aside. When the legislation began, the rules of the entire present world would converge here, and except for the lawgiver herself, even the primordial gods dared not come into direct contact with these endless chains of law at this time. After all, the so-called present world was in the eyes of the gods the consciousness of chaos. Including the anomaly of the law at the birth of a deity, it also only occurred in the present world and did not affect other places. The true complete chaos included everything in the world, but the side of order is what the gods were in contact with. This part included most of the sky, all the land, most of the oceans, and the core of the underworld. Beyond the present world lay the land of eternal night, the realm of lightless, the bottomless abyss, the edges of the starry heavens and the great seas, and some perilous areas of the underworld. There, the chaotic aspects of chaos predominated, and the powers of the gods could even be diminished in that region, accessible without impact only to those who had touched upon great divine power. Seeing Cronus retreat, Themis pursed her lips. She stepped forward, standing at the highest point of Mount of the Gods. In the next moment, the goddess of justice gripped the scepter of divine authority tightly, and the vast divine power began to surge within her. It was not just her intermediate divine power at work, but also a portion of the divine authority of the divine king temporarily bestowed upon her by the scepter. Under the dual influence of divine power and divine authority, imperceptibly, a part of the innate consciousness of chaos, the law of the present world started to open its gates to the goddess guided by the godhood of law. Instantly, Themis seemed to see the chaotic source force accumulated between the chains of order. These remnants from the beginning of creation were common in the regions outside the present world. But in places dominated by order, their mere existence made the flow of law much more arduous. Thus, Themis raised her right hand. In complete silence, a brass-colored book, neither jade nor stone, opened its cover. On the tome, initially engraved with calendars and the order of the spirit realm, new inscriptions began to emerge. As part of the pact, she used spirit script to write, reinforcing the initial spirit script connected to law. The divine power in her body churned increasingly. As inscriptions emerged on the codex of creation, strands of law materialized from the void, racing each other to flow towards the divine artifact. During this process, not only did the chains of law themselves seem to be purified, but also invisible forces emerged, silently infusing into the codex, slowly enhancing its power. This invisible, high-quality force strengthened and rounded the aura of the divine artifact with every increment. Themis knew this was the attributeless source power transformed from the chaos. Apart from acting as a medium through the codex, this source power also continuously poured into her, becoming part of godhood of law. Though Themis's divine power did not increase, her limit had been opened. The path to powerful divine strength had been paved by her. Thus, under the watchful eye of Cronus and the secret observation of the Lord of the Spirit Realm, the goddess of law held high the codex and proclaimed to the law of the world. I, bestowed by Chaos the master of law, the great ancient Titan god-born, the wielder of the divine authority of the divine king, the writer of the codex of creation. In the name of order, I hereby make a covenant for the present world. At the same time, the very moment Themis raised the codex of creation, an invisible ripple spread out. Every deity, with intermediate divine power or greater in the chaos world, turned their gaze towards Mount There, the law of the present world was being rewritten. Unlike minor divine power and weak divine power, starting from intermediate divine power, deities could begin to make initial contact with the origin sea of the world. Godhood is the external manifestation of source power. Except for the world itself and great divine power, no intelligent being can easily touch the source itself, as this essential force of the world would only assimilate their thinking gradually. In the words of Laine's previous life, it was assimilation into the Tao. Therefore, chaos created godhood, and Laine formed the multifaceted crystal condensed from the source power. Only by adding a layer in between could the gods exercise their authority freely. However, just like a needle dropped into seawater, although the water cannot stop it, it's also difficult for the needle to cause any harm to the water itself. Once divine power stepped into intermediate divine power, gods were no longer as fearful of source power, as if it were a fearsome beast, but instead could sense its rhythm to a certain degree, and even utilize this to deepen their understanding of their corresponding origin. And it was this sensing ability that allowed them to faintly perceive that at this moment, on Mount Otherworld, the current laws of the world were converging, and some deity was influencing the arrangement of the rules. Themis had walked the earth for 1,000 years, and more than one god had witnessed her presence. The gods were well aware of what this goddess had done, but in their eyes, a being with intermediate divine power daring to amend the law was utterly impossible. Yet, the tremors from the origin sea forced them to change their minds now. Maybe this not-so-famous ancient Titan god was not arrogantly overestimating herself, but truly had some special method. And no matter what method Themis employed, the gods were very clear that as the laws of the present world were completed, her godhood of the law would undoubtedly be elevated. Great divine power, there was no question about it. Whether they wished to admit it or not, the gods could only accept that another deity capable of influencing the direction of the world was about to be born. It's Themis. She said last time that she wanted to establish laws for the present world. I thought she was joking, but I never expected it to be true, one god said. Upon the sea, the primordial sea goddess stood beside her husband, speaking with certainty. To establish laws for the present world, if she is successful, the ascended godhood of the law would be strong enough to support her in reaching the peak of great divine power. It looks like another strong figure is about to emerge from our generation of titans. Upon hearing this, Oceanus nodded. As the ocean deity sovereign, he was happy to see his sister's promotion come to fruition. Themis's godhood meant she would not interfere in his and Pontus's war. After all, as fellow sea gods, their conflict was deemed natural. Let's set out. We shall go and congratulate her together. After watching for a while, Oceanus withdrew his gaze. Establishing laws for the present world was not a matter of 1 or 2 days, and there was enough time for him to reach Mount Otherworld before it was completed. It's been a long time since I returned, and I wonder how much the Mount of the Gods has changed from what it once was. In the underworld, the god of the sky, Ether, was surrounded by his brothers and sisters. Unlike the gods of the land above, the deities of the underworld were few and weak. Aside from the goddess of daylight's relatively strong godhood, only the god of destruction and the god of doom had a chance of stepping into intermediate divine power in the future. In the eyes of outsiders, even though they weren't strong, with the support of 2 primordial gods, their special status was recognized by all the gods. But only they themselves knew that the primordial gods had never truly regarded them. Even the land of eternal night and the realm of lightness kept their distance from them. It wasn't that they were unable to enter, but like other gods, they did not know themselves whether they could return once they went inside. Kerr, I have warned you before not to go around causing trouble. Last time you went to Mount of the Gods, Cronus let it go in consideration of Mother, but that doesn't give you the reason to act rashly. No secret can be kept forever, and they will eventually learn the truth. When that time comes, no one knows whether he will use us to establish the authority of the Divine King. After all, unlike his Titan brothers, no one would stand up for us. Looking at his brother, Ether felt some irritation, even though he knew that Kerr had been somewhat influenced by his godhood. Is that so? If there really is such a day, let him come to me. You will likely be fine, since you're just about to go and show your loyalty to him, aren't you? With a cold laugh, Kerr was ungrateful. As a descendant of the primordial gods, even if his nominal parents did not acknowledge him, he still considered himself equal to the ancient Titan gods. In fact, gods like him were not uncommon in chaos. Deities were immortal, but that didn't mean they were particularly wise. You, Pontus, pointing a finger at his own brother, ultimately said nothing. Now, he completely understood why Hemera didn't want to be with them, because, as she said, they were different. Adet novel ben adet. The sky and daylight, their godhood itself dictated that they did not fit in with the other 6 deities. I will go to Mount of the Gods to congratulate the Master of Law. As for you, if you don't want to go, then stay here. Shaking his head, Ether left with a flick of his sleeves. He needed to consider his sister's opinion. Perhaps compared to the underworld, the stars were where they truly belonged. Should we attend as well, Father? Gazing up at the sky that Ether had on his mind, the moon goddess Selene looked at Hyperion. Though she had been born hundreds of years ago, she still possessed weak divine power. Like all deities, she had an appearance mortals could hardly dream of reaching. And unlike in later times, gods of this era, even those weak but beautiful like her, were not worried about their predicament. On the contrary, many deities had expressed their affection to Selene, but she declined them all. Of course, Selene, Laine shamelessly stole the concept of moon, making you so weak. But when I tried to create a land of eternal night in the underworld, I never succeeded. I don't know how he did it, but as the goddess of justice and law, your aunt will uphold justice for you. Selene fell silent. She had heard many times from her father about that deity who resided in the underworld. His seizure of the concept of moon stemmed from a pact with Mother Earth and the Titans. She doubted her aunt would break her godhood for her father. Still, considering her own power, she resigned herself to her fate. The current family of the sun god was different from before. The eldest son and daughter both had feeble divine power, while the once subordinate goddess of dawn was stronger than her siblings. Helios's weakness was at least because he had no opportunity to revolve the sun to enhance his divine power, but his godhood was still powerful. But Selene, she did not want to remain weak forever. Maybe I can find a powerful entity to rely on. If it weren't for the dispute between my father and the divine king, he could have been a good choice. Silently thinking, Selene followed her father, flying towards the center of the earth. At the same time, similar scenes were taking place in many locations. The higher the divine power level of a deity, the bigger the gap between levels. A powerful deity with the potential of level 18 or 19, even in later times, would be an influential existence in chaos. Regardless of their motives, whether their relations were friendly or not, gods left their divine palaces one after another, flying towards Mount Otherworld. And so, on this day, in the 1500th year of the God-King era established by Cronus himself, the gods converged. Atop Mount Otherworld, the sun and moon took turns in the sky, and the tremors of the origin sea grew denser. As time passed, the number of deities around the Mount of the Gods also gradually increased. Surrounding the Mount of the Gods, the positions of the gods were clearly demarcated. The ocean deity sovereign's lineage, the lineage of the ancient sea gods, the mountain gods, and the god of stars, each claimed their own direction, not intermingling. As for the other deities, they were scattered among them, somewhat easing the heavy atmosphere of the divine factions. Out of the four major factions, the lineage of the god of stars was unconcerned with worldly affairs. They resided in the sky, led by the god of sun, without conflicts with other lineages. The only celestial god who could potentially conflict with them, Ceus, had only 2 children, and the stars treated him with exceptional respect. However, the remaining 3 factions were different. Subtly, the mountain gods and ancient sea gods stood together, in opposition to the growing divine lineage of the ocean deity sovereign. The conflict between 2 sea gods had been long-standing, and on the earth, due to the increasing number of river, lake, and spring gods, the tensions between Oceanus and the mountain gods also accumulated. As such, Urea and Pontus, these 2 brothers, also joined forces to face their nephew's ever-strengthening lineage. That is also why, even with 2 great divine powers, Oceanus had yet to truly move against his uncle. It wasn't merely out of concern for Mother Earth's stance, but more so because of Urea's presence. Of course, there was also Cronus on the Mount of the Gods. Everyone knew that although the divine king had been forced to accept the current state of gods governing themselves, he would not always accept it. If the gods went to war, should they give him this opportunity, then he would surely do something. The sovereigns of several divine factions were well aware of this. In the somewhat tense atmosphere among the gods, 3 months passed in a blink of an eye. The perfection of the Codex gradually approached its end. Around the body of the goddess of law, chains of law visibly converged, tightly connecting with the increasingly profound Codex of creation. Adat Novel Ben Adat, with the tip of her finger as her brush and the source power as her ink, under the gaze of the gods of chaos, Themis freely wrote down her achievements of 1,000 years. At one moment, when she inscribed the last character, time and space seemed to freeze for an instant. The surroundings of the Mount of the Gods immediately fell into a strange silence. Only the sound of the chains of law pulling remained unchanged. In this special atmosphere, Themis was not affected. The legal clauses were already written, with just one last step remaining. She pressed her hand on the brass pages of the book, which had somehow grown to the height of a person, and the divine artifact began to flicker in response to the will of the goddess of law. Themis could feel that at this moment, she was infinitely close to the origin sea. Every word she spoke could be heard by the world. In the name of the highest order of law, under the witness of chaos, I hereby make a covenant with the world. Whosoever has lived for 100 days, establish a law. From this moment it shall take effect for all eternity. The voice was soft as it left her lips, but when it truly spread, the very reality of chaos seemed to tremble with it. Immediately, the chains of order around Themis began to chime in an orderly fashion, and shades of gray mist began to emerge from the laws. The mist was fickle, eventually taking the form of serpents. They slithered around the codex of creation, hissing and howling at it. The gods couldn't help but feel solemn in their hearts. That was the chaotic source force remaining in reality, a malignant remnant from the beginning of creation. They were the placenta that birthed Tartarus and also the core of those places beyond reality, which turned back even the gods. The chaotic source force lingering here was just a fraction, 1 or 2%, of what it had been at the beginning, but it was enough to intimidate any deity. Chaos is naturally hostile to order, and that's why it surrounded the codex of creation. But the disparity in power made them instinctively halt their advance. After all, a complete divine artifact of the Trinity was a true equal to the great divine power. And even if not yet perfected, it was not something these remnants of chaotic source force could oppose. Time ticked by second after second, the mist serpents around also gradually increasing in number. When the last traces of gray mist trickled out, the chains of law returned to calm. There were no trumpets or sudden surges of power, but everyone knew the lawmaking had been a success. In the past 100 days, Themis's godhood, origin, and Cronus's divine king authority had both been gradually elevated. All gods could feel that even though her divine power had not increased, the goddess of justice had opened the threshold to great divine power. What remained was simply the accumulation of time. Congratulations, my sister. The gods shall remember your glorious deed. Surrounded the Mount of the Gods, Oceanus was the first to speak out his congratulations. Despite the mist serpent's unpredictable roaming, which kept him from approaching the mount, his resonant voice still carried far enough. Congratulations, Themis, your grace. It is my honor to witness your great work. Congratulations. Your deeds today will surely be immortalized within chaos forever. The ocean deity sovereign's voice seemed to remind the assembled deities as the sounds of celebration started to ring out incessantly. Atop the Mount of the Gods, Themis, despite being very exhausted, still mustered the energy to exchange pleasantries with the various gods. Her efforts of a millennium had finally borne fruit. Feeling the increase in her godhood's origin, she even managed to smile for a few gods from the underworld who were usually not to her liking. The godhoods of deceit and lust naturally conflicted with that of law, but since they were brought by the god of light and the goddess of daylight, the goddess of justice reluctantly accepted their somewhat begrudging congratulations. Yet in her memory, there should be more than 5 deities from the underworld. She wondered what had detained the others. The voices of the gods offering their congratulations kept on coming, but Themis soon realized their awkward predicament. With the legislation concluded, the gods were supposed to come to the Mount of the Gods, but due to the presence of chaotic source force, including Cronus, none dared to come close. Themis had no solution for this. She signaled to Cronus with her eyes, ready to invite the gods to the divine palace behind Mount Otherworld first, where the celebration feast was already prepared. Congratulations, Lady Themis. Just as she was about to speak, a familiar voice came over. The goddess of justice turned around with a bit of surprise, as she had thought the other would wait until the crowd dissipated before coming over. Where her gaze landed, a ripple of space appeared, and a young deity in black quietly materialized before her, seemingly unaffected by the chaotic source force. A few of the great divine powers in the distance frowned, for even with their might, they had only noticed the newcomer a moment earlier. This level of spatial temporal power they had only seen in Cronus before. It should be shared joy, Prince Laine, she said with a slight smile, relieved. She pointed to the nearby Codex of Creation. 200 years overdue. It's time the item returned to its rightful owner. And these chaotic source forces, if you hadn't come, I wouldn't have known what to do with them, Themis said. Hearing this, many of the deities who had never seen Laine before were curious about his identity and his connection to the goddess of law's divine artifact. The few who recognized Laine's presence were also puzzled. Chaotic source force was like poison to the gods who were born in this era. Laine, paying no heed to the other deities, nodded towards Themis. With a gesture, the Codex of Creation shrunk to the size of a normal book and fell into his palm. He tapped the spine with his fingertip, and a page fell from the divine artifact. A streak of golden light flashed across the page, and the surrounding mist serpents were sucked in like water into a whale, leaving no trace behind. Clearly, in the hands of the true owner of the divine artifact, it exhibited an even greater might within the domain of order. "Will you stay for my victory celebration?" Themis asked. "No, I'm just here to take these things you couldn't handle. I've been looking forward to the chaotic source force for quite some time," Laine replied, shaking his head as he declined Themis' invitation. He had no interest in attending a celebration of this era. With the items in hand, Laine was about to bid farewell, but in the next moment, an inexplicable oppressive force suddenly arrived, solidifying the space around them. This level of confinement actually had little effect on him. With just a bit more effort, Laine could easily break free. But he didn't do so. Instead, he simply turned to look towards the source of the power. As expected, in his line of sight stood the family of the god of Sunday. Leading them was none other than As the god of sun displayed his divine power unabashedly, the atmosphere both inside and outside the Mount of the Gods, which had been lively, began to weigh down with gravity. The deities who were preparing to come forward also stopped in their tracks. Although the mist serpent had been cleared away, they were equally reluctant to get involved in the obvious conflict before them. The character and ambition of the god of sun were well known. He was not one to engage in pleasant sociability. Aside from his wife Thea, even his own children held more fear than respect for him. So naturally, the gods were not going to speak on his behalf. As for Laine, it was even less necessary to mention. Among the deities present who knew him, aside from Themis, the majority would be happy to see someone laying hands on him. This deity, who seemed to be older than the primordial gods, had never truly made a move. Even though fate made the gods fear him, it wasn't as intuitively powerful as strength. Now that someone was willing to be the one to test Laine's strength, even the ancient mountain god Aria couldn't help but entertain the idea of enjoying the show. "Is there a problem?" Under the gaze of the gods, Laine asked in an unhurried tone, facing the faintly oppressive divine power coming from Hyperion. With a calm tone and an unrippled expression, Laine's attitude was unmistakable. He didn't seem to take the god of sun seriously at all. At least that's how it appeared. "You know why I am here, Laine? I once went to the underworld to find you, but you didn't even dare to meet me face to face." With narrowed eyes, facing Laine's indifference, Hyperion responded with an even stronger pressure of divine power. Light and heat surged around Laine, rushing straight toward him. But soon, Hyperion realized that, despite his continuing surge of divine power, it all disappeared at the edge of Laine's robe. No, not disappeared. Hyperion could feel that the power of the great sun was still there, still pressing forward. Only a distance as narrow as a finger's breadth seemed to be stretched 1,000,000 times longer. No matter how close his power got, it was always just a bit short of reaching the other party. Facing such a situation, the god of sun glanced sideways at the divine king, using his peripheral vision. This kind of technique seemed like it involved the authority of space, but as far as Hyperion remembered, it was Cronus that was the god of space and time. But none of that mattered now. As the forces of both parties met, the intermediate divine power level of Laine was clearly perceptible to him. It was somewhat threatening, but that was all, making Hyperion's resolve strengthen slightly. "Laine, you must be very clear about my purpose. Thousands of years ago, you used eloquence to confuse the divine king, obtained 3 conditions, and shamelessly stole the concept of the moon. Today, I have come to correct that mistake." In front of the gods, Hyperion still had to speak some reason. Although the ancient Titan gods who had truly experienced that time knew that he had been one of those in agreement then. The god of sun was very much in favor of the underworld sun, broadening his authority, and not yet free at that time. He did not know that the future moon would become his daughter. However, the underworld sun had not appeared for a long time, and with the birth of Selene, Hyperion's thoughts had changed as well. On the other side, Laine remained unmoved by the god of sun's questioning. From the time the other party had gone to the underworld, he had anticipated this day to some extent. The other party wanted the moon in his hands, but how could he not want a chess piece to deter the gods? If it were any other titan, with the gap in divine power level, Laine might not have any good solutions, but Hyperion picking this time and place to create trouble could only be seen as planting the seeds of his own misfortune. Feeling the laws of the current world that had not entirely dissipated around him, Laine did not respond, but instead turned to look at Cronus. "Is this your idea?" Upon hearing this, the divine king standing off to the side was first taken aback, then promptly and decisively denied. "No, this matter is not of my concern. The divine king's promises are never discounted." Although he longed to say yes, then join forces with Hyperion to bring down Laine, and see if he could reclaim his origin of time and space, Cronus, after much consideration, abandoned this thought. Now that Hyperion had taken the initiative to step forward, Cronus could decide based on how events unfolded. If Laine was not as fearsome as he thought, he believed his own Queen of Gods would certainly defy the divine king's command, voluntarily doing something to Cronus's regret. But if Laine dealt with the problem brought by the god of sun, then he would not act rashly. "Laine!" With a low shout, the god of sun, who was ignored by Laine, once again felt a surge of anger. He had anticipated many possible reactions, such as refusing to hand over the concept of moon or finding some way to leave directly, or perhaps telling the gods about the past agreements and prophecies, attacking his inconsistency, but Hyperion had never expected to be completely ignored by Laine. He wanted to take action directly, but the fruitless probing from before still allowed the god of sun to barely regain some rationality. Cooling down, he turned his head to glance at Crius, the god of meteorology. The result was a relief. This relative gave him an affirmative look. Once, because of the calendar, Crius also harbored some dissatisfaction towards Laine. It would be too much to provoke a conflict directly, but to lend some support in a fight, he dared to do so. "Goddess of justice, my sister Themis, this greedy deity first stole Mnemosyne's memory, then conspired to take my daughter's moon. I hope you can make a fair judgment and make him pay for his misdeeds," Hyperion said. Now with a helper, Hyperion still thought it wasn't enough. He tried to get Themis to stand on his side as well. Clearly, the result was not as he wished. Gods and godhood mutually influence each other. At least that's how chaos's native deities are. Besides the former Heavenly Father, no one could make the Master of Law go against her nature. Had it novel been at. Moreover, even on a personal emotional level, between a friend who lent a divine artifact and the god of sun whom she hadn't seen in a millennium, Themis wouldn't hesitate. The god of spirit was born before us. The ownership of memory is chaos's decision. As for the moon, that is an agreement witnessed by the mother goddess and us. Shaking her head, Themis had no intention whatsoever of showing favoritism towards her brother. She turned her head to look at Laine. If he required her help, she wouldn't mind standing on the side of justice. Themis, whose divine power had not yet broken through, might not be a match for the god of sun, but she was confident in stopping Thea. An agreement? It was nothing but him threatening us with a prophecy. With a scoff, Hyperion seemed to have forgotten how meek and humiliated he had been during the time when the Heavenly Father was still present. As the leader of the lineage of the god of stars, he had long since lost his former wariness and meticulousness. "Since you are unwilling to help me, my sister, you'd best not interfere with me," he said. "Even if you have received a promotion in godhood, you are still not a match for me as of now." "And you, Laine," Hyperion sneered as he looked over, ready to stop tolerating any further. "In the presence of the gods, I will show you that power is far more effective than words." The next moment, the sky brightened. As his voice fell, Hyperion no longer hesitated. Vast divine power surged from him, echoing the celestial bodies in the starry sky. Having made his decision, he did not intend to probe any further. The sun in the sky instantly erupted with 1,000-fold heat, and all intelligent creatures of chaos could see that the sun, originally suspended overhead, began to deviate from its position, falling towards the earth, gradually accelerating. As the original god of sun, the mighty Titan deity, Hyperion did not need any sun chariot to drive this celestial body. Or rather, relying on external objects to harness the symbol of his godhood was in itself a sign of insufficient strength. At the same time, the ancient Titan gods Thea and Crius also secretly exerted their authority. Although they did not take direct action, light and sun were so compatible that meteorology could also amplify the sun's power. The sun's radiance became intensely brilliant, drawn by divine power. It hurtled straight towards Laine. The force of this single blow, with the combined strength of the three titans, elevated Hyperion's power more than just a level. Even the several beings of great divine power present could not help but show a grave expression. Although the birth of his eldest son had caused Hyperion's divine power to fall back to the threshold of great divine power, this attack that pulled the sun could make any deity here take 3 steps back. You still have time to give up now. Hyperion finally smiled as he looked at Laine on the Mount of the Gods. Once the sun sets, you will have no chance to repent. Raising an eyebrow, Laine had to admit that Thea and the god of sun were indeed a natural pair. Together, they were almost approaching divine power level 19. If it were not for Hyperion digging his own grave, Laine would not have dared to stay put. Of course, not being able to withstand it did not mean he could not avoid it. The sun faintly locked onto this space, but after all, it did not have the authority over time and space. If he circumvented through history, traveling through time, Laine could easily retreat tranquil. However, compared to avoiding it, he had a better solution. Nothing is absolute, Hyperion. Gods must pay a price for what they have done. The same was true for Uranus, and you are no exception. The lessons of history are right before your eyes, yet you have never learned a thing. Shaking his head slightly, Laine calmly responded. The next moment, the flow of time around him was instantly distorted. Under the power of his authority, 1 second stretched into more than a quarter of an hour. This was just a basic application of the power of time. With ample time, he slowly raised his hand, and the Codex of Creation floated and turned pages in midair. In the blink of an eye, countless pages filled with spirit script were flipped through, finally stopping on the section that detailed the rules governing celestial bodies. Everything has its order, and even the divine king, if he misuses his authority, will be punished by the world, to say nothing of a god of sun. And with the Codex of Creation in hand, Laine could make this retribution more concrete, more severe, more efficient. The dissension of the great sun was actually not a big deal. As long as Hyperion controlled it properly and did not let it truly collide with the earth, the backlash he would need to endure was almost negligible. However, the fact that the sun god suppressed his eldest son for hundreds of years, causing the celestial body that was supposed to rise in the east and set in the west to hang in the sky, was his greatest violation of order. And on this Mount of the Gods, where the current laws had just been established, the remnants of the world's laws would amplify the power of the Codex of Creation, subjecting those who strayed from order to compounded punishment. The revolution of the sun and moon follows its statutes. According to the Codex, each should follow its path. As he spoke, Laine's divine power flowed into the book in his hand, absorbed by this object that was close to a Genesis artifact. The next moment, a sound of chains clinking echoed through the void, and the sun that was hurtling towards Laine slowed down abruptly, losing the momentum it initially had. Hyperion, as a god of sun, also noticed that the more the sun deviated from its original trajectory, the stronger a force seemed to resist its movement. Although the great sun was still approaching Laine, the might of this strike had already been greatly diminished. Just a little trick, Hyperion scoffed. Snorting coldly, Hyperion glanced at the Mother of Light beside him. Seeing this, Thea understood and agreed, and the two of them began to mobilize their divine power together. accelerating the descent of the sun once again. If Laine had been an equally strong deity, or held a complete Genesis artifact in his hand, Hyperion would have definitely turned tail and fled. But now, even if it meant using almost half of his strength to counter the chains of law, he still had ample confidence. However, he had yet to realize the gravity of the situation until this moment. Violators are guilty. Those who are guilty shall be punished. Accompanied by Laine's second proclamation, Hyperion at first didn't take it seriously, but then his expression suddenly changed. He had been prepared to once again resist the power of order, but just now, he was horrified to discover that his control over the sun was waning. Apart from chaos, no one could shake a god's divine authority. Hyperion thought he might be hallucinating, but then he quickly realized the problem. Is it Helios? What have you done to him? Crying out in alarm, Hyperion understood. It wasn't chaos who was diminishing his divine authority, but that the sun itself had inherent issues. Since Helios's birth, the sun had two masters, one symbolizing its existence, the other its operation. But due to the oppression of his eldest son, the sun had never truly orbited since the day it was born. Without a doubt, this was a violation of the existing order. But under normal circumstances, being the original sun god, a few hundred years wasn't enough time for Hyperion to pay the price for this. However, under the influence of the Codex of Creation, the feedback of order had been amplified. Adat novel benadat. Hyperion's control over the sun began shifting toward his child. Although this transfer was reversible, he was forced to stop the descent of the sun. He could continue the attack, so long as he had enough trust in Helios. But obviously, there was no such trust between the god of sun and his son. Although Helios had always been obedient to him, Hyperion knew all too well not to trust that from his own experience. For the sun god, who had personally staged fatherly love and filial piety, a daughter might be okay since there was no conflict in divine roles. But for his son Helios, he had long been on guard. Good, very good, Themis, is this your justice? Knowing he could only return today without accomplishing anything, Hyperion cast an angry glance at his sister. Since the Oracle Stone Tablet was remade, it was entirely different from the original. Even the ancient gods on Mount of the Gods, who had seen the tablet before, did not recognize that the Codex of Creation was that same stone tablet. This was always meant for Prince Laine. I merely returned it to its rightful owner, Themis explained, frowning slightly. Would he kindly lend you the divine artifact, considering his and our fellow Titan's relationship with us? Hyperion snorted coldly, his rage not clouding his mind. He gave Laine one final look and turned to leave. Any more harsh words now would only become a joke, but today's matter isn't over. Watching Hyperion walk away, Laine shook his head slightly. He could probably guess what the other was thinking. But unfortunately, when to act, you may decide. When to end, that's for me to say. And so the next moment, he reached out his hand and took out a gift that had been stored for 1,500 years.